Good morning.
Morning, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing well. And you? You got your coffee? I do too.
Yeah, I got my coffee. It's been it's sort of a surprise morning. I think I've mentioned I've got two 14-year-old boys going on 15, and our house is tends to be the meeting place for the neighborhood kids, mostly because we live in a mixed neighborhood of people of different income levels, and we have one of the larger houses for Toronto, which actually isn't that large, but it's larger than many of the ones around here. So we have extra rooms like this one. So I know we were planning on taping this morning at 8 a.m. But I was surprised to learn that about four kids slept over last night. And actually, I shouldn't say I was surprised to learn. Obviously, this is my house. I knew they're here. But I mentioned to my sons if they could all like sort of sleep in their two bedrooms because I needed the room in the morning. But like a lot of my advice, that fell on deaf ears. And so when I came up here this morning to sort of set up the podcast, there were two kids sleeping here, and so they're good about it. They're uh, 14-year boys don't often take to being woken up before like 11 a.m.
Right.
But at around 7:55, they managed to sort of rouse themselves up and left behind a little bit of a mess that I had to tidy up, but nothing that was too unpresentable. The one thing I should mention, it does not smell like teenage boy in here, which is always another concern when you have a number of them here. So, and anyways, I know we're starting a little later than we were planning, but I've got my coffee. I've got me. I'm all put together. The room seems to look at least as
Yeah.
nice as I can make it. It does need a few touches, I have to admit, but for now, I think it's serviceable.
Well,
Uh,
even if it did smell like teenage boy in there, thank God smell-o-vision is not a thing, right? Like
no, no, we don't have to share it with every.
Right.
Yes, it would have been my personal torment, aside
Right.
from what I'd be sharing with you. But part of the reason, obviously, that I wanted, to connect today is, just to talk a little bit about sort of like, obviously my world's super fascinating, but to talk a little bit about each other. So we started this podcast last, a few weeks ago. We had the pleasure of interviewing Marcy Rankin as our first guest, who obviously has a very fascinating story and is sort of trying to make her own way in the world and figure out how to leverage her this event that sort of happened to her, whether she sort of brought it on herself, into advocating for advocating for women to have access to for trans women to continue to have access to female spaces like washrooms. But one of the things that I thought would be very interesting, because we're still getting to know each other, is to try to
Right.
learn a little more about each other, especially if we're going to be hanging out on a regular basis doing these podcasts. I guess also we had a little bit of a delay. I don't know if any of you noticed that part of the reason it's been, I think, 3 weeks since we did our last podcast is I look a little different. I got tired of being old and decided to do a little bit of facial work to revise some of the things that were troubling me about getting old, like a lot of people. And so I'm still in the recovery process, but it's coming together. And I finally felt well enough after 3 weeks to put my face in front of camera and to put myself in front of Joe and the rest of the world and to join all of you on our podcast.
Wow. Well, you look great, Laura. Yeah, awesome. And your hair is gorgeous, and I'm so jealous. I can't wait to toss this wig off and rock my own hair. It's coming in. But definitely, yeah, I'm really excited to get to know you. And um, even what I've gotten to know, I really enjoy. And I really appreciate your perspective because while I might say something that I feel fairly sure about, you tend to always give me a little bit of well, think about it this way. And I usually, go on about my day and it ruminates. I'm just like, oh, I never thought about that. Or, oh, yeah, that's true. And so I always appreciate your perspective. And
Yeah,
then,
no,
yeah.
yeah, no, thank you. I've like it's like I said, it's been a pleasure to work with you just because, like I said, you come from this, this whole different background that I have, like, being military and being, like I said, growing up in a religious Christian background. And I've always appreciated, like, I'm always been a seeker in terms of like finding new information. Like I've like I know some people like saying like this is what I know, this is the world as I like it. And I've always enjoyed like being challenged. Like even when
Mhm.
things that I thought, oh, I'm pretty sure, like you said, like I'm pretty sure of this, when someone comes at me with a new perspective, or well, the reason I believe this is because I've had these experiences and this shapes my worldview. And sort of under like, I always find it very interesting to try to put myself in the perspective of someone who's grown up differently than me and figure out, well, how would that have changed my thinking? And
Right.
things that I think are kind of like hard to understand, or why would someone say that, or why would someone believe that? I always still, now that I'm sort of expanding my worldview and talking to more people from different backgrounds, it's really sort of changed like how I think and recognizing that where it's always very easy to say in the past, "Oh, those people are religious, they're just brainwashed, or they're just, uh,
Right.
they're just not deep thinkers." To really sort of get, to understand like different people's values and how that informs their point of views and how that informs how they take in the culture around them is always has been very enlightening to me. And like yourself, it's really changed my thinking, or at least
Oh.
my approach to how. And so I'm very thankful to you and people like yourselves for opening my mind a little bit and at least helping me see like more than one way of being.
I think that's the value of us co-hosting and also just our approach, right? We're both growth minded. Like
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
yeah, I know what I know. I would love to be, politely challenged in a way that is interesting, in a way that we both are coming with mutual respect and we're not screaming at each other, which is great. That's why I love podcasts so much, especially listening to them. Like, as I've said before, I'm an avid Joe Rogan listener because he has people on and lets them talk. And while I don't always agree with everything he or the guest says, maybe I don't agree with his selection of guests or how many
Yeah,
of one opinion he might bring on, but there is so much value to the type of guests he brings on and for the duration that he lets them speak because you really do after hour one, you've run out of talking points and now
yeah,
you're really hearing a person. You're really hearing how they think and that is just so valuable. And while I like other podcast formats and stuff, but the really polished 24-hour news soundbite world, I think, has gone away. Like, we are now in a new media place where open, authentic discussion is so valuable. And so I love that we can bring that to the trans topic, which we haven't even mentioned much about trans. Here we are, a trans podcast. We've got like almost 100 subscribers on YouTube. We're getting
oh
there.
wow,
Yeah, we're like
we're
at
getting there.
80. Yeah, we're like at
We're at
80. I
80.
was
Oh,
like, geez, that's
okay,
pretty
so
good for
people are
one
finding us.
episode. One
So
episode with absolutely
people are finding
no
us.
no hard promotion or anything. So I love that
Yeah,
there seems to be such a need, and there's so many people that reach out to me, I'm sure to you as well, that say what we're doing is refreshing. And
yeah, no,
so I'm so proud to be here with you.
yeah, no. Like I said, I'm glad you're joining me on this journey, and sort of like even like I said, we have different beliefs, but different things. We both believe in the common mission that um, if we are going to have a pathway to saving or preserving what rights we have and to regaining or reestablishing the respect of trans people in the community,
Hmm.
it's not going to come from screaming at each other. And it's certainly not going to come from screaming at people who are willing to accept us, but could also easily be turned off
Right.
by a more aggressive, invasive, or unpalatable approach. And I think a lot of what we have to do is to reestablish in the public's mind who trans people are. And I
Right.
think, and I'm not saying it's just the two of us, that we all know many people similar to us who are, um, who have a trans history, who, whether we've relatively recently transitioned or whether it's sort of like myself who transitioned many, many years ago, who are just not trying to who at their core are not trying to make transness the center of their life, but are trying to find a way to live among society and to
Hmm.
find joy, to pursue happiness, to make a living, to raise children, to pursue hobbies, whatever those may be, like anybody else, in spite of, or perhaps even enabled by the fact that I was able to transition 25 years ago and have this life. And not making it about this constant struggle, not making it about this, look how different I am from everybody else, not trying to make this into some
Mhm.
political or social engineering project, but just like this is what I needed to do to make my best life. I
Right.
did it. I'm actually living my best life, and I really want to make sure other people who are similarly situated also have their opportunity to live their best life, whatever that may be.
Amen, sister.
Amen. So, so one of the things, like because, like I said, we're on this mission that we are trying to, we're on this mission to try to improve the
Mission to
lives
civilize. We're
of
going to
civilized
change
trans
the whole
discourse.
world. Yes.
Yeah, and to allow trans people like ourselves to have a place in society where they can live with dignity. Hopefully, we'll be doing this a long time, but we're just still getting to know each other. And
Yeah.
so, one of the things that I thought, or I think that we thought would be great to do, rather than interview a guest today, would be to sort of sit down with each other and learn a little bit about each other, and also obviously have our audience learn a little bit about us because um, we came into this not as super famous people. I came into this at, I'm just a person who was sort of living a regular sort of suburban lifestyle until about 4 years ago, and then came out and become more public. But even now, I wouldn't say I'm a household name by any stretch. You're someone who has recently taught in the spotlight, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But we're not sort of like big media names. We're not superstars. We don't, we didn't have big platforms
Yeah.
uh, before this. I'm sort of maybe famous within my very tight gastroenterology community, but don't have this huge platform. And so people don't really know who we are. And we don't even know each other that well. So I thought it would just be great to sit down for for as long as it takes and just learn a little bit about each other. And I thought today would be good for me to start and to learn a little bit about you.
No.
So that, and also, like I said, for audience to learn a little bit more about you and refamiliarize with this. So as people join us on a regular journey, we don't just become two anonymous faces talking about a trans issue. It's sort of like, I wonder what Joe's up to and what's new with Laura. So
Sure.
let's start with that. So what I'm really curious about, because I think many of us are shaped by our formative years, uh, growing up wherever we grew up in the world, but growing up with a sense of being a little bit different and how that sort of shaped our personalities and our youth and our adolescence and our early adulthood. And so I'm always a little curious whenever I meet anybody with our history of like, what was it like growing up, Joe? So take yourself back, and I'm not even saying like take yourself back to the first time you recognize sort of some area difference, but what was it like being how would you describe like your childhood?
Sure. Well, I was born a male, spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
Uh, I have a Hebrew name because of the Christian upbringing, so Josiah is my name. It's still my legal name. I'm not going to change it because of how much I value my upbringing and where I came from. And so Joe was a nickname of course, as the Christian does, I worked at Chick-fil-A as a teenager. And so that's a very religious, fast, quick service, chicken restaurant, the Lord's Chicken, you cannot deny. And the manager or the owner of that location started calling me Joe because he said, "Yeah, Josiah's just too long," So like that's kind of where it started with the whole Joe thing.
We're running a business here. We have
Yeah, we're
location.
on a visit. Joe is easier, so I kind of liked that because I knew I wanted to serve in the military, and so GI Joe, yeah. But my earliest memory, like to take it way back, I fell off of a swing out back at my house in Virginia Beach, and I guess my parents' house, not mine, right? And I remember like hitting my head, and that kind of like I don't know if that like started my consciousness or started recording like my life, but I do remember that memory. And then the very next memory that I can think of that's around that same time, around 5 years old, was stealing my sister's ballet recital costume and putting it on and kind of like standing in front of the mirror. I don't remember like being prancy or anything. I just remember wearing it and it feeling right. And I don't know how a 5-year-old would know that or if that's really how I felt at the time, but thinking back, that's how I remember it. And I remember being caught and oh, boys don't do that and um it became the family joke. Like, oh, Josiah likes to dress up in his sister's, tutus. And that was like the joke at the dinner table for years, like into my 20s. Like it was the joke. And
Yeah.
so because of that, and I know they weren't trying to be mean about it. It was funny, like if you think about it in the 90s, how would a religious family like react to that? Like that was the nicest way I could think of. Like I know many other ways that would be terrible, right? But there was just it was just like a funny thing. And
Now, was part of that just because, like, obviously, if you were if you were a hyper feminine
yeah,
child and they saw you doing that, it might carry a different valence than if you were otherwise, let's say,
maybe.
apparently a well-adjusted child who is doing other things that they would expect someone who they were raising as a boy would
Right.
do. So what was like so obviously you put this on and you felt right and it felt pure in a way,
Yeah.
but at the same
I couldn't
time,
understand why it was wrong at that
yeah,
age. I was like, well, I want to wear this. This is what I want to wear. And I know non-trans people do this. Like this is not abnormal in the sense of that means you're trans. Um, I think it's just how it feels, right? I wasn't trying to cosplay. I felt like that's what I wanted to be and wear. Um, but yeah, like they didn't it didn't really come up, and I'm sure my parents like in the 90s like they wouldn't be like, I wonder if this is gender dysphoria. Like that was not language we would have had anyway, and it definitely wasn't language in society, and it definitely wouldn't be in the religious world because you're born a male or a woman and that's what you are. And at least in the Christian religious home. But yeah, I just remember that teaching me that this is wrong, this is shameful, so therefore don't do it. And that's kind of the story of my little outbursts of gender
yeah.
dysphoria, like throughout my entire teenage years and into early adulthood. And adulthood was I would buy clothes or acquire clothes or borrow my sister's clothes, try it on, feel really good, feel a lot of shame, and then get rid of it or, put it away for months. And then it would just be this cycle that would repeat, and I kept thinking I was bad for it. But as far as everything else in my childhood, like no abuse, no trauma, like just loving parents. My dad would always, take me to work, like we talked about, and like teach me like how he would record audio for the Christian Broadcasting Network. So
Oh,
Pat
really?
Robertson, yeah, Pat Robertson in the 700 Club. My dad worked for him for many years, and then he also worked for like an OSHA training video company where they would make training videos for businesses to play for their employees, and he would do a lot of the audio for that, whether it was post production like touch up or like live recording. And so I learned a lot about audio and things like that. And my dad used to tour with bands as an audio person. He used to be in a band. He used to work at recording studios like in the 80s. He worked with, Glenn Campbell and Bob Carlyle and the Newsboys. Who else?
These names mean nothing to me, but
Sorry,
I'm assuming
Sawyer
he did.
Brown. Yeah, Sawyer Brown is a pretty well-known country act, at least from the 80s and 90s. But yeah, these are a lot of
Yeah.
like Christian-esque
Okay.
bands and people, but some
See, Sawyer
secular.
Brown I've heard of, and I'll
Yeah,
tell you why. Because uh, in our family, watching Star Search was like a family tradition. And so I sort of remember a lot of the acts that came up through Star Search. Remember with Ed McMahon?
I don't remember any of that.
You don't remember that,
That
but
was before my time.
that was before your time. Yeah. So as like an 11 or 12-year-old, we'd gather around and watch Star Search. So I remember Sawyer Brown as being one of the lead acts that
Oh,
came
they were on
that
Star Search. I didn't
they
know
were on
that.
Star Search. But the rest of them
Oh,
I haven't
wow.
heard of because like I don't know anything from country music otherwise unless they were on Star Search.
Yeah.
But
Country and Christian music. So Bob Carlyle did the song Butterfly Kisses, which was a very big song in
oh,
the
I know
90s. I think
that.
that's Bob Carlyle. Maybe I'm mixing the names, but
Okay.
whoever did Butterfly Kisses my dad worked with. I could be mixing up the
Okay.
names. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Um,
penetrated through. Okay.
yeah, but Glenn Campbell was a big time like gospel uh country like musician. I think he had something to do with Trump recently. I can't remember. But yeah, so like always heard these great stories of him working with acts back in the day. He was a big Beatles fan, came from like a progressive rock background, and then kind of rediscovered Christianity. And then by the time he had kids, he wanted to raise us that way. He got off the road. He stopped touring with musicians because he wanted to create a stable home. And so, I would hear these stories and like go to work and see him like working the dials and stuff. And so I was always very drawn to like technology and music and things like that. But then my mom, very sweet, like I said, homeschooled me and three of my siblings. I have two. sisters, older and
Okay.
younger, and then I have an older brother who's about
So what
5
rank are
years
you?
older.
Where do you,
I'm the
where do you
third
fit in
out
the
of
mix?
four. Third out of
Third out of
four.
four.
I am the diplomat peacemaker.
Okay,
Yep.
that's your role.
Yep, that's my role. And so, yeah, I had a great childhood. I would go out back and shoot guns. I would, paintball, drive cars around the yard, work on cars, like a little bit of everything. And like I would cook with my mom. I really liked cooking. I learned how to crochet at one point because I was drawn to that. And so anything that I was interested in, my parents generally supported and would provide me a path to earn it or get there. So like my first Xbox I wanted to buy, they're like, well, you need to save up your money and you need to do certain things around the house or, go sell something or, like make money and buy it. And so they would teach me how to do that. And I just learned so many great lessons from them. And
Yeah.
so I'm very
So
thankful for my upbringing and childhood. I wouldn't change much except maybe a little bit more understanding of queerness and things like that. But then again, in the religious household, it just wouldn't have fit. And I don't knock them for that either because that's what they believe and that's totally fine.
yeah, no, it's it sounds like, I think a lot of us get this impression, especially those of us who are trans who grew up in religious households, that it must have been a horrible, hellish experience trying to
Right.
balance, like I said, you know your dysphoria or your divergent behavior within those constrictions. Yet I do hear time and time again, even from people who've had religious upbringings, where queerness or like lifestyle diversity was not a big part of that upbringing, still sort of recognizing that their parents were good people,
Yeah.
doing the best they can with their understanding of the world, and still having this goal of wanting to raise children who are going to be good people and
Yeah.
do well in society. And so and it's very heartening to see that
Yeah.
that kind of upbringing doesn't necessarily need to bring resentment, even if you're being raised in a household that's not necessarily progressive or understanding of
Right.
those values. But at the same time, I still imagine it must have been hard.
Well,
uh,
there's two schools of thought, right? So my parents were the Christians that Jesus taught them to love everyone, including, the prostitute, all those different things that are taught through Jesus and the disciples. And their approach to gays and things like that, as those were coming up in politics and stuff, were the same. Like they didn't agree with it because they said, look, it says in this book in this chapter, right, that like is something falling over there?
yeah, something was falling. I have
Okay.
a light that I sort of tapped a little bit.
Oh, gotcha. But yeah, so like
Yeah,
certain books it says like, they were of the mindset homosexuality is like an abomination and a sin, not any greater than others, but still a sin, and you shouldn't do that. And so, but they didn't treat people who were gay as bad people. They said, well, we still love them because they're all children of God, and Jesus teaches us to love. We just don't agree with what they're doing. And it was very similar to how they would approach maybe certain Democrats, right, that believed certain political things that they didn't agree with. Like, well, we still love them as people. Like, they're not trying to inherently do anything bad or wrong or hurt
yeah,
anybody, but we don't live like that. And because it says here in the scripture, like, this is how we live and this is what we believe will create the best type of way of living our household. So I always
yeah,
appreciated that approach that while I could tell it was something wrong based on what they were teaching me, because that is what they were teaching me, they also weren't teaching me to hate people, which I really valued. And the same with different races and the same with different cultures. Like my dad was very curious and open-minded, and my mom also. And so I really valued that aspect that while they believed firmly what they did, they had their convictions, they were still curious to learn from other people's perspectives and debate. Debate was a very big thing as well.
yeah. So as your life, as your sort of, your childhood and your adolescence, was there ever, like, how good were you at sort of hiding things? Because, it sounds like you had a lot of interests that would have been like, I hesitate to say that this is a masculine interest or this is a feminine interest, because I do think that, you know, you know, whether you're raised as a boy or whether you're raised as a girl, the world should be your oyster. You should be
Yeah.
open and allowed to be interested in whatever you're interested in. And if you are, raised female, but you're interested in more, let's say, pursuits like uh, that are more male coded, let's say, like being interested in the military or firing guns, or at
Yeah.
least in my mind, is things. But whereas, um, that is, that there's still space for that. But like, so were those things helpful in terms of surviving an adult, or you mean a childhood and adolescence, while having gender dysphoria, while still having be able to do this cover saying, well, look, I still like these things. I still do things that are maybe male coded,
Yeah.
enough to sort of reassure your parents, or were there all, or was there still sort of this sort of sneaking suspicion on their part that there was something going on that they weren't crazy about?
I don't think they had any idea.
Yeah.
So when I came out to them, they were like, well, there weren't any signs. Like they just thought I was a charismatic, caring, sensitive boy. And they never thought that I was questioning my gender or anything. Um, and a lot of those things that I did were great cover for other people because I would get clocked as being gay or something because I was more effeminate. But I'd be like, well, no, I can shoot guns and I can drain my oil in my car. Like I can do all these things, right? Which would save me with a lot of the more masculine groups I would try to be in. But my parents weren't so limiting, other than clothes and like very specific things. I did dance, so like my sisters danced, and they needed boys to be in the ballet, so I would also do dance classes. My parents were very supportive of that and encouraging of that because they didn't see that as like a wrong thing. It was a Christian dance studio, of course,
Yeah.
a Messianic Jewish dance studio, actually, which got me a lot of exposure to certain Jewish customs and cultures. But
Yeah.
they believed in Jesus as the Messiah too, which was, I thought, a
So,
very
is
interesting
this the
thing.
same, like, just both for me and our listeners? Is
Yeah.
this like the Jews for Jesus kind of people,
Yes.
or is this
Yeah. So
different?
Messianic Jews are those who believe in Jesus as Messiah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they follow a lot of the holidays and customs and rituals, but then they also acknowledge the Gospels and Jesus as the ultimate rabbi, I guess. I don't know entirely, but that was always fascinating to me because it was like I felt like it was a more pure way of doing Christianity because I was like, well, if Jesus was a Jew, then these people seem to be doing it right because they're still doing all the Jewish stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. I know there was some bad blood for a bit.
well, yeah. So the non-Messianic Jews, I know, really, I think despise them for something. I don't know in the history, but I
Yeah,
was ignorant as a kid just to growing up to that, and I thought it was really a beautiful way
yeah,
to practice
I know. Definitely
Christianity.
growing up Jewish, when we heard about Jews for Jesus, it was like, you watch out for those people because that's just the gateway drug.
Oh,
You
that's
use that
so
to get
funny.
in, and before you know it, you're going to be wearing a cross and going to church, which was like an abomination if you were
Oh,
raised Jewish.
interesting.
So yeah, the Jews for Jesus were kind of like,
I could
yeah,
see that initially. I
we
could
we,
see that
we
being a
saw them as being
concern.
pretty devious. Like, growing up Jew,
Oh,
it's like, yeah, they'll
that's
they'll get you.
crazy.
It's sort of like, those old well, once again, I always,
Yeah,
yeah, I make the mistake of thinking we grew up together, but
this is
when
your
we were,
brain on heroin. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Or no, it was the commercials where like the drug dealer was kind of nice to you the
Oh,
first
right,
time.
right.
Well, it's
Okay.
like, I'll give you the first one for free because you look like a good kid.
Right,
And
right,
then
right.
before you know it, you're hooked, and he's got you in his claws. And that's, yeah. So that was like what
Yeah.
Jews for Jesus were for us.
No,
But
yeah, that's so interesting. But yeah, the whole dancing thing, like they were supportive of. When I wanted to learn crochet, I remember my mom was like, "Yeah, let's go get you a crochet." Like there was never a whole lot of gatekeeping of my interests, and I wanted to do everything. And I think that's something that made it harder for even me to realize gender dysphoria as what it was because I did have access to a lot of other things. I could play with my sister's Barbies, and then I would also incorporate my GI Joes into that, and like
yeah,
I could play the more feminine part or the more masculine part. And so I would kind of do both. And having sisters and a brother, I wanted to play with my older sister because she was like a year and a half older. But then my older brother was 5 years older. And so, like, I would want to do things with him too. And so, some of that I think gave me the ability to kind of just explore what I wanted to explore and learn what I wanted to learn. And while certain hyper feminine things I was drawn to, like clothing and stuff, it was never because I wanted to be girly, it just felt right. And so
yeah,
most of the time, my activities, I didn't really care for the clothes I wore or the shoes I wore because they were just, I had to wear them because that's what I was given.
Yeah.
And so everything
Everything they
else in
do.
my
Yeah.
mind, yeah, everything else in my mind was, well, I want to learn how to do this. I want to do what my dad does, and I want to do what my mom does, and I want to
Yeah.
learn it all. And I think it's just so much fun to learn. And I was so curious. I was always asking why and driving my parents up the wall because I was just wanting to understand it. But deep down, I had this envy of women, and especially of my sisters. And I would see them doing certain things that I knew I couldn't do because it would be considered weird. I remember one time I was having like a birthday party. I think it was my 13th birthday. And I was talking to my best friend, and he was saying, "Oh, what should we do?" And I was like, "Oh, maybe we could do like karaoke." He's like, "Oh, that'd be really fun." And I remember pitching this idea to him that he just looked at me like I was the weirdest person ever. I said, "Well, how about we do it where all the boys sing girl songs and all the girls sing boy songs?" And I thought that was like the greatest idea in my mind because it would allow me to sing girls'
As would I have.
songs. Yeah, it
Yeah.
allowed me to sing girls' songs without it being weird. And he just kind of looked at me and was like, "Why would we do that?" No, it was just like it occurred to me. I was like, "Oh, this is that thing I have to hide, right?"
Yeah.
I had so many little aspects of that through life.
Yeah.
Got
No, it's
really depressed as a teenager, obviously, and Linkin Park had just came out, and Hybrid Theory was my album because it's all about angst and not understanding myself and not understanding others and feeling hurt, and yeah. But generally great childhood. I loved skateboarding as a teen,
yeah.
and like I said, play
But, like,
guitar
one of
and
the
all
things
that
that I
stuff.
thought was really, like, just coming back to something you early on is that what it really sounds like is your parents obviously were raising you as a boy, but they were raising you as a sensitive boy, like someone who is,
Hmm.
where that was considered to be a reasonable quality for a boy to have. Like you mentioned
Yeah.
them being sort of open to interests. It wasn't sort of this hyper masculine, like you have to be a warrior and feel no
No.
pain and a stoic, or that it
Yeah.
sounds like, even I don't want to say in spite of, or whether it's because of the religious perspective, they were just raising you to be a good person, in a way that I think someone like myself, who didn't really have a strong relationship to Christian hyper religiosity, finds very fascinating, because I always assume or presume that kids who are raised in these environments are being trained to be, like, with very tight gender roles of this sort of
Sure.
hyper masculinity or hyper femininity, whatever, pageants and debutante balls and submissiveness, or this masculine culture of dominance and
Yeah.
stoicism. And it sounds like, and I don't know whether your family was the exception in the sense, or just that was this how
A
your
little
community were,
bit.
just how your parents were, that they accepted you as a sensitive person.
They accepted all of us.
Yeah.
My dad was a very is a very sensitive and emotional person, especially in his older years now, I think even more so. But I remember because the Pentecostal church is very emotional service. Like, we didn't go to the one where they swing from chandeliers or did any like the real nutty stuff.
Okay.
But they did speak in tongues and raise hands to worship and put hands on people in the front and have emotional moments during services. And I would see my dad like shed tears during services because of, I don't know what, if it was guilt or an overwhelming sense of the Lord and the Spirit coming upon him or whatever it was. But I would remember seeing, even as a kid, I was always because he was a strong leader in the family, but then on Sundays in worship, I would see him his his exterior and his defenses break down in his way of worship.
Yeah.
And I always admired that he would cry sometimes because the service was so moving, and it taught me that it was okay. And he was always sensitive, and like he was a creative, like I said, he came
Yeah.
from that musical background and stuff. And so it definitely is how the parents enforce it. Now, I knew other homeschool families that we would say had the strict dad, which was he would come in and like lay down the law and there would be no emotions. Like it was almost like militaristic or regimented. And it's not like they didn't love or care. It's not like I knew abusive dads or anything, but like it was clearly different than what my parents were doing. And
Yeah.
so that's why I say I so value that because of the people around me growing up similarly, I was still growing up very different than they were and having access and ability to do things that other kids never got to do.
Yeah. And I think it also belies sort of, like, I know there's often this myth or misconception of, people who are eventually recognize that they're trans and choose to transition, of being sort of hyper feminine, and or but also ones who were not hyper feminine. And
Right.
it's often used as a bludgeon to say, well, you were into cars, or you were into guns, or you were into sports, or you were into,
Right.
pick your your masculine code of pursuit, and saying, well, this just means that you're not really feminine, or you're not
Right.
really female. But what I'm seeing is, when we look at even women, like, people who are natal women, not all of them are hyper feminine. Like,
Right.
many of them are, we recognize as women because they're sensitive, or because they're nurturing, or because they're relationship oriented. And and I think when we see young people, or people who are trans, telling the stories of their youth, that are not sort of walking around in high heels and being, limp wristed, or
Yeah, like
excessive
Dylan
curly.
Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney is an extreme, right? Like
Yeah,
the Dylan Mulvaney walking around making it a show. There are boys and girls that are like that. That even as young kids, they're like that, and they tend to go into show business, and it makes sense. But there's so many people like I think like us, right? That like not so much hyper feminine, just average.
yeah, but having, like, sort of feminine traits that we valued, but we're not the ones that were obviously showy, or
Right.
and I think people tend to sort of mix that up and saying, because you weren't sort of over the top feminine,
Right. Then you
as
must
a
not be.
then you must not really be female. When I
Right. Or
really do think,
trans, yeah.
or trans, or there just might be a lot of different ways of being female. And I'm
Yeah.
not going to get into myself
I mean,
today,
my
but
mom was a tomboy growing up. She rode
yeah,
dirt bikes with boys, like in Louisville, Kentucky. Like, and my dad was not the hyper masculine. He was masculine, but he wasn't a hyper masculine dad. So if you combine a tomboy mom with a sensitive and emotional man, you get four kids that are a spectrum of that. Like
yeah,
my older brother is definitely more authoritarian, masculine, but still sensitive. And he's doing the homeschool thing with four kids and all of that. But then my older sister was definitely more of a tomboy growing up. And while she's not as much now, and she can appreciate, certain things about her femininity, it's still different. And then my younger sister is very feminine, like always
yeah,
has been ever since she was young. And so like she was more of like the outlier because she was more stereotypical feminine as a girl than any of the other kids in their born genders. So it's just like I said, it's the environment. A lot of it, it's not the environment that turn determines if you're trans, but it's the environment it determines for sure some of your interests and some of what you're exposed to. And I was lucky enough to be exposed to so much. Um, and I think homeschooling and then just my parents, their unique perspective and where they came from really helped with that. So I
yeah.
really love them and value that. And I try to tell them often, but I'm sure I don't tell them enough how thankful I am.
Yeah. No, no, it sounds like I said, it sounds like it's, like, despite being from this different community of where, like, these religious values, where sort of queerness or transness doesn't have a clear place, that at their core, there's still good, there's still obviously decent people, or
Yeah.
we're decent people. And it sounds, by the way you're talking about them in terms of your childhood, that these are people who've largely remained with you, or had maybe had their own journey to understanding what you've been through, but these are people who are still part of your life.
Yeah, for sure. I talked to my parents. I haven't visited them since coming out because, as you know, this is only since publicly since 2024. So I haven't had a chance to go visit them. They live in Louisville, Kentucky now. So to be closer to my mom's family, that's there. And so yeah, I haven't had a chance to go visit them, but they said I'm welcome. So like, it can be the elephant in the room sometimes because
Yeah.
they want me to be healthy and happy, and they love me, and they tell me that all the time. But they don't think that transitioning was necessarily the best way to do that. But they also still love me either way. And so it's like, well, I know how they feel about it and I know how I feel about it. So as long as we don't really talk about it, then it's fine. We can still talk about everything else. Um, and I'm always open to talk about it with them, but if they're ever curious, I'm happy to talk to them. But really we just talk about life. Like it's shocking and big to them that this happened, but it's also like the least interesting thing about me. And it's like I don't need to talk about being trans. Like I can talk about so many other things.
Yeah, no, obviously navigating those kind of relationships, so you transitioned a year and a half ago, you said?
Yeah, so I came out publicly in 2024, February of 24.
Okay. And by publicly, is that, and that's also when you sort of told family, or is that?
So family knew a little bit earlier as I was kind of starting my journey, but I hadn't like started dressing publicly regularly. So like in 2024, for around February, March 2024 is when I started pretty much doing it full time. Like I told my civilian job and changed, my name. I took the E off of Joe, and that was a big bold statement, for going from Joe
Yeah.
to Joe. And then I think it wasn't until June or July that I made the announcement on Facebook, which covered a lot of my more extended family. And I
Yeah.
waited a long time, more so to give my parents time um, to be ready for that, because so much of my extended family are very Christian and um, maybe think about it a little bit differently. And so I just wanted to spare them and give them time to prepare and process and not blast the entire family where maybe my dad's parents or my mom's parents or cousins are asking about it and just overwhelming them. So I took a very like methodical approach
Yeah.
for them because I love them so much and I knew the environment that I was coming out in when it comes to my family. And so I wanted to respect them as best as I could and be sensitive to it because I'm not it's it would have been really easy to just come out, demand my pronouns, scream at them, right, and like never see them again would happen. That would be the result because they that would be such a turnoff. Like I would basically be an asshole to them if I did that, right? And so I care so much about them. I wanted them in my life. So I thought, what is the best way I can do this that's still authentic, but does respect them and where they're coming from and shows that I want them in my life and I'm not doing this to push them away or reject anything that they taught me. I'm just doing this to continue living in a way that is better than it has been. And so I can get on with my life without this, as I say, this bullshit weighing me down that's been, attached to me for so long as like this fog of, yeah, I'm still successful. I can still do all these things, but like I still have this like thing that just won't get off of me. And it finally did when I came out, and I'm so much clearer and more content. I'm not frantically pursuing a new achievement anymore. I can really take time to appreciate everything. And so that's kind of my approach to my family and being as religious as they are is I needed to be sensitive to that. And I didn't feel like that was sacrificing my authenticity to do that. I think some queers like tend to say if you come out and you should demand your space and demand your pronoun, like, and they should like that's a great way to alienate people who don't understand.
Yeah. Like, so, it sounds like you're giving your parents obviously a lot of grace in terms of that given that you saw a pathway. In other words, you said, these people are important to me. They've obviously been a very important part of my formative years. I like these people as people. I
Yeah,
want to keep these
I
people in
love
my
them.
life. Yeah, you love them. And how do you negotiate something that you know that they're going to be struggling with, yet still wanting to keep in their life? And one of the struggles that I've always had is, and it sounds like you're doing this too, which is when you're coming out and you're saying, okay, here I am, here's my new name, here's how I'm going to look, here's how I'm going to sort of present myself differently. But I think a lot of us do this where we're like, but I'm still the same person. I'm still whoever you
Yeah,
grew up with. I still like the same things. I still, we can still talk
yep,
about the kind of things we've always talked about, whether that's, in your family, it sounds like, uh, probably your life in the military or
yeah,
cars or maybe it's sports. And what I found is that while I could do that, I found that part of it increasingly hard. But you're
sure.
right. If you just sort of come in strong and say, no, I'm not that person anymore, and I'm not interested in these things, and that was all just a show, or that was just what I needed to do to get by. But now I'm interested in these different pursuits. All of a sudden, it's not just like, oh, well, Joe's made some changes. It's now like Joe's a person who's completely
Or
unrecognizable to me as a person.
Joe deceived us.
Joe deceived us. Yeah.
Right. Joe told us all these things growing up, and we thought everything was fine, and they were secretly suffering or wanting to live an alternate life. And I always wanted to be a boy. Like I wanted to. Like I wanted to be cis, but I just couldn't. And
Yeah.
That's really all it is. And I really wanted to stress to them that I'm not forsaking what they taught me and not rejecting them or rejecting myself. Part of that is why I kept my name and don't plan to change it. Like, maybe if my name was Frank, I'd be more interested in changing it. But like Josiah to me is just like, I know it's a masculine name, but it doesn't strike me as like a hard masculine name. Plus, I can shorten it to just J-O, and it's still a neutral feminine nickname, and it's still authentic to me. But then also, yeah, like with my parents, like I'm still the same person, and they're like, "Well, but you're not." I'm like, "Yes, but I am more so than you think." And I had a lot of people reach out, close friends and family, like, "Oh, does this mean you don't like cars anymore? Does this mean you don't like this?" I'm like, "No, like I still like all those things. I'm really just gonna
Yeah,
dress differently and present differently, but like most of my life is still gonna be the same. I didn't transition for a new life. I transitioned to to live a more fulfilling version of my current life.
yeah. Like, but I still imagine, like, even with a family who's sort of like, it sounds like they love you and
Yeah,
they accept you. It sounds also like they would rather this didn't happen
of
in a
course.
sense, like,
Well, so
yeah,
would I.
which is understandable,
Yeah.
and I think that's exactly right. But I imagine there's also times in spite of this where you must feel is and I don't know, whether they call you Joe or Josiah, or,
Yeah.
even if you don't insist on pronouns, whether they still respect you enough to call you she or her, or whether they are starting to even like what I find when I go home, or at least in those early transition parts, it would even though I was trying to be respectful of them, I would still find it very grating at the times when they were presuming masculinity still on my part, when I was finding
Yeah.
that very when obviously in the rest of my life I was not getting that. Um, do you find any struggle still as you're getting farther and farther out from the coming out process, in terms of how you're navigating this relationship with people you love but who have traditional values? And in terms of how much you're willing to accept and how much actually grates on you to the point that it becomes a challenge to still be in that setting.
I give my family and parents a unlimited pass. So my sisters were very quick to switch, especially my younger sister. She's been very supportive and very great. My older sister as well. My older sister had a little bit more because we were closer growing up, I think, of like jiving with calling me sister. And I
Yeah.
never asked her to, but she came up with a term. It's called broster. So she combines sister and brother, and I love it. And that's what she loves. She's like, "Does that offend you?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Please, like, I really want you to be comfortable. Like, so much of my approach is to make other people comfortable, and maybe sometimes at my own, um, impact. But that brings me a lot of joy and value is other people being comfortable around me. So with my parents, I've noticed my dad, and now I haven't visited since, but on the phone, obviously, there's not a whole lot of pronoun usage because we're talking to each other. And so I can't say if I've heard that, but like I know I've seen my dad on Facebook defend me from another family member that was attacking me for being trans. And he used my name a lot. He used Jo. And
Yeah.
so I took that as that's a very polite way to be authentic to himself. Of maybe he doesn't agree with calling me her because to him that's so shockingly different than what he knows from growing up. But then also he was polite and kind enough to say, well, even though we used to say Joe or Josiah, uh, he just referenced me as Jo Joe in that exchange. And I thought that was like really kind. And like even if he had said he was still defending me. So like it wouldn't hurt me or anything. And I know they're not doing it to hurt me. And I think that's key too is intentionality. So my older brother is probably taken it the hardest. And we were close for a long while, very close. Uh, and he went down the diatribe of you've been possessed by a demon, like Matt Walsh stuff. Uh,
Okay.
he said, you'll always be a boy, and I'm always gonna say he, and it was more like it felt like he was hurt, so he was saying these things as like I'm holding my ground, and while he wasn't trying to be mean, his intentionality was very different, right, than my parents, who might use a different pronoun. And so while I still give him the unlimited pass, I said, "Look, you're my brother. If you see me as your brother, like that's fine. Like that's I'm not here to do that. If there's a relationship to preserve, I want to preserve it. If there's not and it doesn't work for you, then I respect that too. Just know that I love you and the door is always open. And that was my approach with him. And while we haven't really talked since having a really long conversation about it all, I know where he stands. He knows where I stand. With it, I still have faith that he'll come around. And
Yeah,
so I think if I wanted to, I could have called him a bigot on this stupid stuff that I think would have just terminated that relationship. And he wasn't being a bigot. He was being himself and he was being authentic. And I didn't see it as bigotry. I just saw it as the manifestation of how he grew up and what he understood. And so I'm not going to just shut him down and play the pronoun police game with him. Like he will always have a pass because I know that he loves and cares about people and me. He just hasn't figured out a way to be there yet in all of the ways. And maybe he won't ever, but I still love him. And so everyone has been taking it differently.
yeah, no, that's like I think a lot of us with transition, especially those of us who are more, who maybe, like you said, take a more methodologic approach or are more mature about it, kind of recognize that everything we do involves a negotiation, involves a compromise in terms of,
Right.
like you're right, like any one of us can go in really hard headed and be really doctrinaire and be really uh, uncompromising about
Right.
what we want. But you have to recognize that if you're going to be uncompromising, it's going to lead to a certain set of outcomes that you also have to be okay with.
Right.
And that might be like alienating yourself from your family and alienating and whatever values that brings. Now, if your family are terrible people, that's fine. This
Right.
is, alienation or separation might be just the way to go. But if you're coming from a family where you value these people, it's become very hard in terms of, you having to decide, I don't want to be, I want to have a way to keep this person in my life, even if
Right.
you don't totally understand or they don't accept or think you're possessed by a demon,
Right.
as you put it, but having that sort of maturity to understand that, okay, I don't agree that I'm possessed by a demon. I
Right.
think this person's point of view is wrong, but they're not doing it out of a sense of evil. They're doing it because
Right.
they care enough about you that they want you to be better and figuring
Right.
out or want or want you to be saved or want you to be whatever.
Yeah, like he
That
doesn't think those things like in a way to tear me down. He thinks those things as a way like I want to help you, but in his mind, helping me is not living a trans life,
yeah,
which is fine. Like I don't agree with that. And the whole compromise thing is so true. So like it's very common to say hold the line, don't give an inch, otherwise it take a mile. But that where in reality does that actually happen? And I heard this the other day on a podcast. They said if you're in a married relationship and you want to sleep on the right side of the bed and someone wants to sleep on the right side of the bed as well, like your partner, there's a compromise there. And it's not because that you let them sleep on the right side of the bed that now they hold dominance over the entire relationship for the rest of your life. Like, it's so crazy, some of these hold the line conversations about pronouns or about whatever it is. And they're like, oh, if you give them this, then that means all of these things. It's like, yeah, but nowhere in like a society where people are trying to compromise and work together does that happen. Like, for instance, that marriage example or anything else in a marriage where you compromise. If I compromise to a husband or a wife, like one little thing, I'm doing that for the greater good, and that doesn't mean that they ultimately have all power over me. Now, if I'm always ceding and compromising, then I am giving them power, but it's just a goofy argument to be like, oh, if your parents don't affirm you immediately, then they hate you. And that like brainwashes these younger trans people to think, I need to be upset at this because I was told if they do this, then that means that they hate me. And that is so wrong. Like, it's so
well,
wrong.
sometimes like it is genuinely upsetting. Like
Of course.
like it grates on me. And not that this happens, obviously it's been 25 years, but I remember at the time during early
Yeah,
transition, it would really grate on me when I was called by male pronouns.
sure.
And I would have like, and I wouldn't be like, if you do this again, I'm not talking to you. But as people sort of, I think what it came with time is sort of comfort with the fact that, there was always concerns about when you first do this, that like you ruin your life, you've gone crazy, you've gone mad, you're throwing away everything
Right.
that we valued, you're shoving this in our face, whatever it is. But after a few years, as people sort of get to know you and they realize you're kind of staying on the straight and narrow and you're managing yourself and they're sort of seeing aspects of yourself come out that they can recognize as good person things,
Yep.
and they want to be part of your life and you want them to be part of your life, that you sort of gain this ability of like, hey, I know this is a hard habit to break, but when I hear this, it really hurts.
Sure.
It really, and like everyone else seems to be getting it, but you're not. It's like, what can we do?
Sure.
Because, so I also like at one point I recognize you can't sort of do everything so fast, but at the same
Right.
time, if there are things that are important to you,
Of course.
and for me, like being seen and respected as a woman, whether it's for my family, my friends, my coworkers, was very important to me. And so while I
Sure.
was often forgiving of mistakes and or oversights, when people otherwise claimed to care about me, but couldn't manage this,
Sure.
there was still a point where it was like, okay, it's time to have a conversation about this, and I need to let you know how this makes me feel.
Yeah.
And if you want to continue to be part of my life despite making me feel this way, it's going to be hard for me.
Sure.
And I don't know if those conversations are conversations you've had or conversations that you feel are forthcoming, or just you've decided this isn't something that grates on me enough or it ever will grate on me enough that I'm
Yeah.
ever going to be, make it a point.
I think it's because most of my life outside of my family that all live in other states, so it's not like I'm around them often.
Sure.
Everywhere else, I'm affirmed, and I've never had to even ask. So I haven't had to demand pronouns because everyone has been pretty respectful of what I'm trying to do. Like they see me and they generally get it right. It's more of the people that have known me that have the struggle, and I know it's not because they're doing it intentionally. It's because of a habit of that's how they
Oh,
called me
yeah.
for years.
Yeah.
But yeah, the military, everyone has been great about it. And so, but I also felt weird. Like I think only one or two times I kind of stopped someone. And what's funny is I don't know if it was because I felt bad for speaking up for myself, which is my own baggage to deal with, or if it's because like it really wasn't that important. Like it was more of like a correction versus it's hurting me. Um, it is weird to be in person with someone and hear male pronouns when I'm dressed like this, and I'm like, don't you see how much of a disconnect it is? Like, but most of the time I just ignore it. Like, I haven't found that it gets in the way of more important things in my life yet. Now, maybe later on when I'm like 10 years this way and it's more of a like come on, it's been 10 years, right? Like maybe that will be a different discussion than like it's still in the beginning in my mind. This is still very new to people. I'll keep giving you time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's like that's a good approach to take. Like for me right now, because like the only person who ever sort of misgenders me is like my father, and he doesn't do it consistently, but he does it from time to time, especially if he's just talking and not thinking.
Sure.
And like so if we're going out for lunch somewhere and he says like like he says he or something, and like a serving staff overhears, they just assume like he's got some sort of dementing process at this point, as opposed to it really being grating. And I'm like,
Like a mistake
this,
almost like
yeah, like this is
sometimes
on
people
you now.
do misgender as mistakes or they call
Yeah,
the other sibling's name or
yeah. So at this point, I'm able to say it doesn't reflect on me. It's just more reflects on him.
sure.
Like he's the one who looks silly to other people, and I'm sure that'll happen as time
Yeah.
goes on. With yourself as well. But so you're in the military.
I am.
You went in straight from high school, or was it?
Couple years. I went to video game design school for a little while and then joined the military at 19. National Guard, so always part-time.
Yeah. So what drew you to that? Like, uh, it's something. Obviously we're all different. Um, that sort of environment has never held any appeal to me, and it
Yeah.
certainly didn't hold any appeal to me like pre-transition. Um, and I imagine as someone who is dysphoric, and as I imagine you were, um, entering that kind of environment consciously. Oh, small interruption there. I don't know, small child interruption.
It's fine.
Entering that environment consciously must, you're obviously taking all these factors into consideration. So, what was that like deciding, okay, this is something that appeals to me, but I'm also going in with this baggage. How am I going to manage that? Or was it more sort of like, I'm just going to do this and or let the cards fall where they may?
Yeah, because I didn't really know what I had was dysphoria. I thought it was just some problem that bugged me at times. it didn't drive a whole lot of my decision making. Now, I'm sure subconsciously it did. Like, if I join the military and achieve something, then that'll fill this whatever thing is wrong with me. That'll fix it. I mean, that drove a lot of things, but my primary reason for wanting to join was service in my family. My grandfather, great uncle, not my parents, but like my parents' parents, they all served. My brother served. I saw movies like Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down, and like I wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself, and I wanted to serve. And so
Yeah,
service is in my blood, and so the whole whatever it was that I know now to be gender dysphoria, like it was something that I just thought lifelong would be plaguing me. So like I just kept doing things that I wanted to do. Some of it might have been influenced by like if I do this, then I'll be the epitome of a man. I know there were some decisions that some of that was in the back of my mind, like, oh, I hope this finally fixes this other thing. Even though I want to get married and I want to have a house and I want to join the military, I also hope it fixes this other thing. And so that's kind of more of how I would think I was going about it.
yeah. No, it's interesting because, like, I'm sure similar to yourself, I was also of the impression that I've got this thing, but it's just going to be a thing I'm gonna have to deal with. Like, I had no, like, at 19, like, the idea of like actually transitioning was sort of like so far out there.
Yeah.
Like, it was something only crazy people did, and I was
Well,
not
I only
crazy.
knew sex workers and serial killers is
Yeah,
all I knew.
and that,
Yeah.
yeah, basically, or just very yeah, other
Hmm.
prurient type stories of people who just seemed out there, which was not sort of who I was. But at the same time, I had this sort of this consciousness of like, I don't want to really masculinize my body any more than I need to. And
Right.
so like anything that made me look like I had the fortune or misfortune, I guess, of growing up being very thin and slight, and the thought of like working out and getting muscles was sort of something that was very like anathema to me,
Sure.
or even just having to be in environments where you're surrounded by hypermasculinity, I would have found very overwhelming. But
It
so
was
I just went,
overwhelming. Yeah, the
yeah,
barracks was overwhelming. But I was overweight. So I joined and I was very unfit and very overweight.
oh, really?
I had just lost a bunch of the weight before joining, not because I was going to join, but it just worked out that way. But then I remember I couldn't even run 2 miles like when I joined, and so I had 4 months to fix that before basic training. But yeah, I was very overweight. I was like 280 pounds and I was shorter. So as a 5'10" kid at 15, yeah, I was like 280 pounds, so I was
Oh,
pretty
wow.
heavy. Yeah, so a little bit taller, and then also cutting sodas out of my diet really made me shrink. And I'm sure puberty also helped with that. But yeah, so that was another thing I did. Like, oh, if I just get really fit, doing CrossFit and all this stuff, that'll make me feel more comfortable in my body. Because then I won't feel so uncomfortable because it must be because I'm overweight and people make fun of me for being fat or being weak. And so, well, what if I just fix that? And what's funny is the more fit I got, the more I was drawn to aspects of myself in a feminine way.
Really?
Yeah,
Like,
so I started getting like more defined legs and a more defined butt, and like I started filling out, and because of my genetics, I am built more like curvy and feminine, like I have bigger hips and stuff than most men do, and a smaller upper body, and so like the more fit I got, the nicer my legs looked, and it made me even more dysphoric because I was like, well, now I really want to like look nice in my workout clothes and look cute, and I remember I would buy like shorts that were a little bit shorter than most men would wear, or I'd wear leggings sometimes, and like I would just be filled with so much euphoria, like even going to the gym and coaching as a fitness coach, I was for a while, CrossFit coach, and
yeah,
like I was always drawn to the strong women that were in there and like their clothes. I was like, oh, I wish I could wear their booty shorts and their sports bras. Like I wish I could be and look like that. And so it's interesting. Like I got fit and it definitely helped so many things, but it didn't make it go away. It actually made it more, I think, prevalent because I would look in the mirror and see myself becoming a more fit man and wish that I could I wish I could look like the fit women in the gym
yeah. No,
instead. And it was more of a like starking difference there that was happening.
yeah. So you're entering the military. You're going to. You mentioned like doing basic training.
Yeah.
And so, but it also like what I'm really getting at. You've mentioned this before as being sort of this very mission driven, as in like
Yes.
this is something I've always wanted to do. You mentioned sort of being interested in serving your country or
Hmm.
serving society.
Yeah.
And so when you're going through this process where obviously, like, like for me, it's not just the appearance of looking male or looking being interpreted as being male, but I found masculinity always very off-putting. And being in situations where there was a lot of male energy, partly because I just didn't have the skills or the personality to
Yeah.
mirror it
Same.
back effectively. And at the same time, also recognizing that these are like a lot of the things that come with hypermasculinity. While there is some positive values that come with masculinity, um, in certain situations where there's a lot of men together who are trying to prove themselves to other men, it can often veer off into this very, for lack of a better term, even though it's colloquial, this sort of toxic,
Sure.
masculinity. And I found that very hard to manage in the few situations that I
Yep.
found myself in, whether that's on sports teams or just sometimes you're just out with the guys and the guys are being guys.
Yep.
Um, I imagine the army is and once again, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I don't come from a military background. Sounds to me like almost a very sort of intense, highly concentrated version of that.
Yep.
So what was your strategy for like either getting through it or surviving that? Was it sort of mirroring it back and doing your best to sort of, I'm going to be a rah rah guy,
It
or was it just
was,
kind of a hide in the
yeah.
shadows?
A little bit of both. So I struggled and I would get accused of being gay. And this was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. So being
Yeah,
accused of gay was also job threatening in the military. But it also was so weird to me because I'm like, well, I've never been attracted to men. So that's weird that you would say that about me. But yeah, I would get accused of being gay, not because I was effeminate, but because they could tell that I couldn't be a man very well. Like I was
yeah,
trying, and it would always come out so weird and strange that they would just
yeah,
kind of look at me like, "What?" And so I really
yeah,
struggled with that. Now, once I got to my unit, it was very different because aviation is not like the hypermasculine, like infantry, for example, but basic training, I remember, or any of those shared job trainings where it wasn't just aviation people, it was always really tough. Really, really tough because the hypermasculine, the toxic masculinity, that kind of thing. And I was always drawn to the more empathetic and emotionally driven men. And so I would kind of find my people in the group and align with them. People who were thinkers too. Like I just could not do the you know I don't know what you even call it, like the jock. Like I go and move heavy things and don't think about it. Like I just always wanted to like be more philosophical and stuff. And so I struggled a lot with it, and it was really hard in basic training, I remember, because that was also the first time I was around so many people that weren't homeschooled like me and weren't
yeah,
religious like me, and it was just people who came from very rough backgrounds. People were stealing stuff from my locker, and that was new to me. I'm like, why would someone ever steal something? Like, I remember just so many things being shocking, but definitely trying to fit in as a guy was really tough in that environment. But once I made it to aviation, it was different because it was a lot more um,
cerebral,
thinkers,
yeah,
really. It's like, and it wasn't so harsh, toxic masculinity. Now, there are some of that in aviation for sure. But Army aviation is considered so different compared to the rest of the Army that a lot of people are relieved when they come to aviation because they're like, oh, like we can actually be adults here, you know?
yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be all like rah rah and all
Yeah, we're
showing off to
operating
people.
we're operating aircraft. We're not running around with guns, so it's like we have to
You get
be
to
a
move
little bit
around.
more cerebral.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, the cerebralness, like, yeah, it was always like, I grew up also very sort of drawn to intelligent people and intelligent conversation, and if that came from men, it certainly made it easier to be around them.
Sure.
But you mentioned that sort of like this trying to be male, which I've often heard described as like having a subtle accent. Like no matter how hard you try to
Yep.
mimic whatever the accent of the people around you are, they can still always tell something's a little bit off.
Yep.
If you grow up a certain way and you can be fluent, you can make perfect sense, but people still sort of pick up on this thing that's a little bit off, even if they can't quite put their finger on it. And I think being dysphoric or being trans and trying to like pursue those happen ways, trying to be a guy, it's like,
Yep.
yeah, 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 I see what you're trying to do there, but it's not quite,
It's
it's not
not
quite there.
authentic. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not coming naturally. And so whenever I would
yeah,
really open up and be naturally myself without all the masking that I was trying to do or the cosplaying, that's usually when I would, unless by the ignorant people, that's when I'd be accused of being gay or being a closeted gay. But the non-ignorant people, so like the more, like I said, cerebral people, they just took me as being an emotionally like connected guy, and they
Yeah.
didn't see it as necessarily a flaw, but they could tell when I was putting on a front in front of men and trying to do the man thing. And I would say things that were just awful things in hopes of being not discovered as being weird or whatever,
Yeah. No,
right? Like I
understandable.
remember saying terrible things about queers. I've said terrible things about women. I've said terrible things about other men. And it was never authentic because I am not a hateful or mean person. I remember it was always in hopes of getting acceptance from the masculine energy I was surrounded by.
Yeah, no, that's it's completely understandable. And and I know like men often like weaponize like faggotry as
Yeah,
sort of even if they're not necessarily implying that you're interested or attracted to men, is just like you are behaving in a way that is breaking the male code, and
right.
telling you that you're a faggot is probably the quickest, most
Yeah.
direct way of telling you you're doing it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and I didn't follow sports, so I didn't have that language either. Like I couldn't talk about sports, I couldn't talk about a lot
yeah,
of things. And it's not because I followed Barbie. It's like I was into music and I was into politics and international relations. It was always very interesting, like European countries and how they work. And so I just also didn't have many people that were interested in those things either in the military. Like most of those guys are not interested in a lot of that stuff. Now the officer corps and like the more professional side, yes. But
yeah,
E1 and basic training, you're not having philosophical discussions about the EU or anything like that, right? Like it's very much who's playing this weekend and football and who won and who's the best MMA fighter and stuff. And I struggled with a lot of that. I was like, I have no language for this. Like
yeah.
it was so bad.
Which could have just been a function of being homeschooled or just
Well, yeah, my dad wasn't into
yeah,
sports.
just
Like my
yeah,
mom was more into sports than my dad, and so my dad was the musician and the thinker. So like I never grew up watching sports either. So I had nothing to fall back on.
yeah. So um I know we have our space, and
Yeah.
we'll cut this out, but I want are you free later? I
Yeah,
know you
yeah.
got things to do because I wanna like, we're leaving things hanging here.
Uh, oh yeah,
There's so
happy
much more to
to.
talk about.
I
There's
mean,
so much
yeah,
more.
like we have the whole crash rumor and stuff, which like I've said 100 times, but I'm happy to go over again because I think every time I say it, I'm starting to figure out it a little bit better way to say it and process it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, and I'll but also I'm also just sort of also interested in just like, being an adult and being in the military, and sort of this
being
challenge
married
also.
twice, like
Yeah, of finding your place, and, like, I had this too to a lesser extent. It's sort of like, "Okay, like, I think I found my place here, like, as a guy." Like, and making things work, like,
yep.
and I'm sure, being in the military, it's like, "Okay, I got this now." Yeah, I got this
Yeah.
thing, but I also got this.
Yeah, between that and
I'm
my
very
civilian job and my marriage and
yeah,
my house, I was like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Like, I'm making it work. Like, all the plates are spinning and I'm keeping them all up, you know?
yeah, and I really wanna get into that 'cause, like, obviously, my experience is very similar in the sense of, like,
Yeah,
when I think of, like, why did I wait so long to transition, like, in my case, into my,
right,
like, mid-20s, it was still a lot of the sense of it was, like, it would I always think, and I still think of this now, it would have been easier to do earlier if I had less to give up.
right.
And and, um, and so it was really a challenge to really say, "I'm willing to sacrifice or at least put this on the table, like, ante this put this into the pot," as part of the bet, bet on myself for transition, and that took a lot of, and I'm sure it did for you as well, but we'll get into that
Yeah. Well,
later
we'll
'cause I know
take a break.
we'll take a break.
We'll do our Twitter, or sorry, didn't mean to dead name. We'll do our X spaces,
Yeah.
and then we'll come back afterwards and keep talking. And both of
No,
us will
I don't
be
know.
hoarse by the end of this because it'll be like
Yeah.
4 hours of talking. But I'm down.
Yeah, don't worry. Elon's fine dead naming me, I'm sure, so I can dead name Twitter. When you joined the military, you didn't really have a clear sense of what this was.
Hmm.
Obviously, you recognized that you were different. You understood you had some sort of affinity, but I think, like a lot of us, having the right word, that there's two things going on, like having the right words, but also understanding, like, how does your experience and whatever you're internalizing compare to other people who are following a number of different paths, and trying to figure out where you fit in along that. So, where in your journey did you finally kind of recognize that this is who I am, even if it's not necessarily like this is what I need to do as a result of this is who I am, but this is who I am, and I have to at least be put transitioning or put, uh, you know, making wholesale changes to your life in some manner somewhere on the agenda, if not actually scheduling it, but just something I'm going to have to sort of figure out more actively as opposed to just sort of dealing with the background noise of being dysphoric or having these feelings, as you might have put in.
Yeah, so like my egg cracking moment, I guess, is that what you're asking?
Even though, I know that sort of the colloquial issue of like egg cracking, like this is the day that I'm finally doing something. But even just sort of that recognition of like, this is who I am, and
Hmm.
I need to kind of like figure this out in some way.
Yeah, so that's what I call egg cracking. It's not doing something, but having the realization. And so that was a little bit of a process. I was in flight school at the time, and I was in SEER school, which is a survival school. Um, and it is a classified school. Some aspects of it is classified, so I'll dance around some of it. But the parts that I can speak about, you're in the woods for a while during an exercise, and you're evading, people trying to capture you. And in that process, you're multiple days out there with no food or very little food, and if you can find any. You become very tired, very sleep deprived. Eventually, because of the way the school is, you have to get captured because you have to go through other aspects and kind of practice your training that you've learned in a classroom. And so in captivity, I was put in a confined space or a box, as you call it, that I could stand up and move around in, but it was a very closed, um, like basically like 3 feet, 1 foot, like kind of space.
Yeah,
So tight.
locked in the closet. Yeah.
Yeah, basically like a closet. Funny coming out of the closet. But no, so in that space, it's like I'm guessing it was about 12 hours that I was in there. And they were doing all sorts of uh what do they call it when they overwhelm you with sound and they have those float tanks and stuff? What is that called to
Like
your sense?
sensory deprivation.
So it's a lot of that stuff. Yeah, sensory deprivation with like songs and poems and all sorts of crazy stuff coming through the speaker. And so that's happening, and I'm just exhausted, but I'm trying to stay awake because every time I try to sit down and sleep, somehow a guard notices, opens the door, slaps me a few times, wakes me up, and then it's like an endless cycle. And so while I was in that state, um, I had no defenses left. Like I was exhausted, I was hungry, I could not push certain thoughts away that started to pour in during that moment. And I've heard other people describe things like ayahuasca or mushrooms.
I was
Like,
actually thinking of ayahuasca, like some
yeah,
sort of
so I've heard people describe that, and I know you can
yeah.
enter some of those states with breath work and stuff. And so I liken it to that. Now I've never done ayahuasca or anything, so I'm not quite sure, but I liken it to that because of the stories I've heard where you're starting to see things because you're so tired, you're starting to hallucinate, and you're starting to access parts of your mind that when you were doing your everyday life, you had the ability to lock away or discount and push away. And I didn't have that anymore. I was left with, standing in there for 12 hours, like tired and exhausted. There wasn't anything else I could do to distract myself from it. And it just started pouring in. And it was like an epiphany moment of, all these things in your life and all these behaviors and symptoms, that means you're trans, right? Like that's basically what my mind was saying. It's like, this was what this means, right? And I had no exposure to the trans topic. As we mentioned, I grew up without very, very much like any understanding of the queer community. I wasn't Googling this stuff prior to the training. So it's like it was so foreign to me. And I was like, oh no, is this what this means? Like, and it just kind of like broke me, and I was just kind of like, geez, like I'm gonna have to deal with this when I get out of here, because if this is what it means, my life is gonna be ruined. Like, like all I could think
Yeah.
about was all the negatives. And so I finished the school, I graduated that, and started flight training. And during that same time, I had to figure it out. I had to speak to a therapist and work through some stuff and understand it. And I didn't even know what gender dysphoria was, but the therapist was like, these are all the things you're describing, and based on how long ago it was in your past and how it still is today, these are all symptoms of gender dysphoria. And I was kind of taken back because I'd never heard that before, but when I looked up the definition and she kind of explained it to me, I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, this explains
So
me.
when was this around, just chronologically? Like,
2021.
okay,
I was just like, so I was 31. So I was just like, oh my gosh, this explains so much of my childhood that I didn't understand and so many aspects of it. And then, of course, my first thought is, well, now that I know what it is, I can fix it. I can find better ways to cope. Like, transitioning was so far out of my mind. It was not anything I wanted to do. I was terrified of that idea, and it didn't feel like it would be right for me, at least at that time. That's how I felt about it. And so then I immediately came out to my wife and told her about it, and also reassured her that I wasn't planning to transition. I was just gonna continue living my life as a boy. Like
this
I'm,
sounds
I'm gonna,
familiar.
yeah, I'm gonna get treatment. I'm gonna figure it out. But like I needed to tell you this because it's going to take some work, and it's gonna take both of us working on this together to kind of get through it. But I still had no doubt in my mind because of all the things I was able to achieve and how strong-minded and strong-willed I was. I had no doubt that I could fix it. I was still very much like, I can fix this.
Yeah.
I don't need to be that way. I can repair or cure it. And so that's what we decided. And so I stayed in therapy, but also like explored a few things like dressing up in private and like maybe doing my nails and stuff with just like clear gel nail polish that I could get away with in uniform. Things like that just to kind of relieve that pressure and that tension of those symptoms. But like anything, once you're in a dark room and someone cracks open the door and a little light shines through, like you gravitate towards the light because it's warm and it feels good. And it's just
Yeah.
like I did, I also liken it to you're hiking without a boot that fits well. Like it's not broken in, it's not quite the right size, and you're hiking for days, and someone hands you a pair that's designed for your foot, broken in, ready to go, and you're just kind of like, why did I
Oh
hike
yeah.
for so long?
Yeah.
Yeah, why did I hike for so long in that those boots that didn't fit? Like this is so much better. And that's kind of what every experience was that I tried. Now I knew some things weren't right for me. And so I didn't do those. But the things that I felt like, yeah, I think this will help, and then I tried it and it did. It stuck with me. And so my wife looked over to me at one point. We were having a serious discussion about it, and just I was still struggling, and I was kind of having ups and downs where I'd go for a couple months just fine, and then I would really, you know, fall into a depression and just like I could still function and stuff, but it was really hard on me um, dealing with it after knowing what it is and knowing some things make it better. And she just looked at me and said, you need to do this for yourself. You need to not worry about me. You need to not worry about your family. I'm not going to turn my back on you. I might not be there for you in the same way I can be there for you today, but you need to do what is good for your health, and you need to take care of yourself. And it's okay that you do that because I can see that this is hurting you, and this is really affecting you. Um, Now that we kind of know what it is, and so we did couples therapy, and still didn't think I needed to transition. But eventually that's what it turned into is like, no, I need to take these steps. This is going to be better for me in the long run. And without her, I would never be here today. Like I owe everything to her and I love her so much. And yeah, that's kind of, and that was the course of like a year and 2 years maybe. Um, so 2021, and then not until the end of the summer of 2023 did I actually take concrete steps towards a transition plan.
Yeah. So, you mentioned sort of like obviously this hesitation, which is something I know I felt, a lot of people feel. And, for me, and I think where there's perhaps some commonality between the two of us is this sense of like this real attraction towards normalcy.
Hmm.
And I think it obviously informs some of our current perspectives in politics about trans issues, which is that one of the main barriers is like I did not see myself as being queer. I did not see myself as someone who wanted to stand out. I liked fitting in. And as a male, I was able to do that too. And I recognized that in order to do this, it was going to make me the center of attention as doing something odd and strange, even though I felt in my heart it was something I needed to do. But that feeling of how do I stay normal through this process, or how does a person who's not looking to draw attention, is not looking to live outside of sort of societal rules and norms, it can be a great sort of barrier, an imposition to saying like, I want to be normal, but I also need to do this thing that is going to mark me as someone who is clearly doing something at the very least, something unusual. And, so you talk about this process, and so was there something along those ways? You mentioned going to couples counseling and trying to make it work. Was it
Mhm.
just sort of the cumulative impact of recognizing, okay, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've got these supportive people, I've I've done normal as much as I can. I've just got to do this, or was there something more kind of pushing in the end that finally, when you started taking concrete steps?
It was my wife. I was not going to take a step that I thought would hurt her, and everything leading up to that point had been hurting her in some way because
How long had you been together for?
we got married in 2016, but we've been together since 2013.
Okay, so very
Um,
long-term relationship at that
yeah,
point. Yeah,
and so like I hated it. It was a double-edged sword, right? So like I would feel better on one hand, and then also her seeing me doing things that weren't being a man, like whether it was dressing up or something, or even having conversations about it, would also be hurtful towards her because it was changing her reality, seriously. And while we both were able to come to a very healthy point now, like during the very beginning and early years of talking about this stuff, and it was painful to both of us. And that's why I give her all the credit. If it wasn't for her, um, I would still be sacrificing myself for the greater good of the family, is how I was seeing it. It's like, no, this is the right thing to do. Like, you need to give up maybe what would be the best for you so that way you can have what's good for everyone else. And she had to stop me. She's like, you can't do this like without you need to take care of yourself, and while you might think it's selfish, it's okay in this aspect to be
yeah.
because it's your health and you're not living your fullest life.
Yeah, and we only get one shot at this, or
Right.
at least we only know we get one shot at this. So it's yeah, I think it sounds like what all of us have our different version of it.
Hmm.
But this is like that very common story of, that I think a lot of us have been through of like needing to finally, a lot of us I think put a lot of other people first, or put our situations first, or put normalcy first, and we finally kind of come to this point where we realize, like, it's like I can't go on,
Yeah.
until I do until I do this. So your wife, now you two are no longer together, right?
Right. Yeah, we're more like platonic partners now. So we hang out all the time and we go shopping and we chat about our dates and tease each other, and we've gotten to a really really good spot now. We no longer live together, but that's only because she wanted to date and then I started dating as well as a result of that once I felt ready. And I still love her very much and I didn't lose attraction for her. She lost attraction for me in that way. And so it was harder for me to watch her up close getting ready for dates with other people. And so I moved out. And that really allowed us to grow even closer together because now I didn't have those heartstrings being pulled like when I would see those things, and it became a much better situation. And now we spend a lot of time together. Every Sunday we watch The Last of Us on Max or HBO. Like we have basically like dates, but like we're not romantic. But we hug each other and sometimes we snuggle a little bit, and like
Aw.
we can. Both of us are just so thankful that we're able to keep each other in our lives because, and this is things that she said, is that she could just come in and like drop all of her concerns and cares on me and we can just talk, and we had such a good marriage. That's the thing too,
Yeah,
is that a lot of people don't understand is we had such a great marriage that um, it was tragic for us to think that it was going to end and we wouldn't be in each other's lives. And then once we figured out a way that we could still be in each other's lives, but then I could still get the health care I needed, that's what really allowed it to blossom into this whole new thing that neither of us thought possible.
yeah, and the way you're saying it sort of makes me think it's almost like when you were fighting before you decided to fully transition, and sort of talking about this, I can almost sense that there's almost this competition between, um, vying for your attention between her and this other woman who's obviously also you. And once that
Right.
competition is taken out of it, it's like, oh, I can actually, it's like now that the guy's out of the way, we can actually be friends.
So true. Yeah, because she was trying to hold on to Joe the man, right? Like because that's
Yeah,
who she married, and there was a little bit of that "you deceived me" reaction in the beginning because of course, and by every right, she should it's okay for her to feel that way, and that's justified. And I would probably feel the same, right? And like I, I always put myself in their shoes. If she wanted to walk out the door after me coming out and never talk to me again, I wouldn't hold it against her. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to stick around and watch someone that you married, that you love as a spouse, turn into your best friend who is looks more like a woman and is still the same person, but also still different, at the same time. And that's I feel like there is a lack of those stories of from the spouse's perspective. There are some out there now, but of course those stories don't get the attention they deserve, especially in my spouse's case. My wife, she's my hero. If it wasn't for her being my rock and foundation and allowing me to transition in a way that I knew that she wouldn't just abandon me, like I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that necessarily I would be dead, but maybe like I don't know, like I would have continued on coping and being unhealthy, and who knows what would have happened, but I definitely wouldn't be the person I am today, and
Yeah.
my life would be entirely different.
And I think these stories are also great because, there's often this narrative, this very negative of what's often referred to as the trans widow.
Right.
The woman who is married to a person who either has some awareness or has no awareness of this person's dysphoria, generally believes this person was never going to transition, and who then gets, this whole sort of situation like placed on the person having to react to it. And obviously there are many women who've been managed this with a lot of resentment.
Sure.
And what I think is sort of different about you, and I have a similar story, it's obviously got its own nuances, but is the quality of the relationship before.
Yep.
If you have a good relationship and one that's based, even if this was not part of it, but one where you're not fighting, where you have sort of the groundworks of how our relationship operates and what are the
Good
kind of things that show mutual
communication.
respect,
Yeah.
that when these things happen, um, that when these things happen, you deal with them the same way you would deal with any other challenge, and you don't fall
Right.
into this sort of resentful trans widow, like my partner deceived me, and now they're doing this whole thing and having fun, and I'm the loser
Sure.
here, and I lost everything. And someone who can actually go on the journey together with you,
Right.
which is, I think, those narratives are really important. And when we talk more about me, like I have a very similar relationship to my previous partner. It wasn't as long a relationship as you had, but it's still one that's very close. And I think these are important stories to get out. And I think it's more reflective of the kind of people, not just you are, but that your partner was.
Yep.
So, the other people who obviously were dealing with with this change was obviously your career. You work in the private sector, but also in the military. Um, Obviously, the military is a big touch point right now in terms
Yeah.
of trans people in the relationship with the military. We know there's, I think the numbers around 15,000 people in the military have identified in some way as being trans or non-binary. So the military has some experience.
Hmm.
You weren't obviously the first person to go through transition, but I'm sure, like like any big organization, there's parts of it that are more accepting. There's parts of it that are less accepting. There are people, your close superiors may be very embracing. Your close superiors might not be. So, what was your experience when you had to sort of tell people who had obviously
Hmm.
been working with you, where trust and cohesion is obviously very important to, I don't know if that's the right term, but operational effectiveness.
Sure.
Um, how was that? How did you raise this issue, and how did uh, your colleagues, your fellow soldiers,
Yeah.
uh, manage this?
Yeah, they're thinking the numbers are maybe closer to 8,000. Some have said even 5,000. So they think actually it's a smaller amount than originally
Okay,
reported, but it's somewhere between 5 and 15. Like no one really
but it's
knows
appreciable.
because the military it doesn't actually track it, which is part of the funniness with the EO and the ban is that they can't even tell the judge how many trans people are in the military because they don't have a way of tracking without going into everybody's medical records individually and looking for history of gender dysphoria. But
Yeah.
when I came out to my unit, uh, I did so via email to my commander, and it was allowed at the time. So this was
So, is there a
2023.
process? 'Cause the military always strikes me as like a very process-driven,
Very big
like
process.
fill out this form and
First
send it to
thing
the
is,
superior,
yeah,
and you have
first
to
thing is you
sign
got to
this
tell your
thing.
tell your commander you wish to exercise the in-service transition policy. That's how I worded it to him. and in the email. And I explained a little bit like, hey, I've had this since I was 5, and like this is what I need to do. I gave him a little bit of personal justification where I didn't need to, but the way the National Guard works and the way aviation in the National Guard works is our state only has one unit for aviation. So my
Yeah.
entire career has been in the same unit with the same folks. So 15 years with the same folks. So I felt more comfortable giving a personal narrative to the notification than maybe others. So I emailed my commander, and he immediately called my cell phone and said, "Hey, I don't know much about this, but I'm here for you for whatever you need. Just tell me what you need and we'll work with you. We're gonna get you back up and flying in no time. Like obviously this is not something you decided overnight, and I'm sorry that you've been suffering and all of like someone who didn't know much about the whole trans thing at all gave me that level of respect and empathy and a good old boys circle, man's world, military aviation world. So thank God for millennial leaders. That I'm mostly around millennial leadership now, and a lot of the boomers have gotten out, right? And sure, there's boomers that are also empathetic and all of those things, but on average, yeah, the millennial leadership has been a lot easier to navigate. And so that was my experience. And I hadn't gone public inside the unit yet, so only leadership knew. So I could start hormones and start accessing things, start growing out my hair, for example, things like that. And then in February, I felt comfortable enough to come out to my civilian job in the private sector, but also come out to my unit and start showing up, changing my gender marker in the military system, which allows you to do female bathrooms and all those things,
Yeah.
and finally come out to everybody. Which people were wondering what was up because I was growing my hair, and
Yeah. Unusual too.
military is haircuts, right? And it's so funny because I'm a warrant officer, and warrants are like they're not commissioned officers, but they're not enlisted, but they usually come from the enlisted, and they're kind of like crusty and shake some of the strictness of the rules. And so they were just like, "Oh, I just thought you were being a very warrant officer, like just growing your
Okay.
hair out like you don't give a
You're
fuck."
iconoclast of the military already.
Yeah, yeah. So I thought that was really funny, but no, I had the exception, and I was growing my hair out because I was allowed,
So,
but I hadn't told them why, and so it looked weird because I looked very much out of uniform for a male.
yeah.
Um, but
So
yeah, that was
did
my
you get the
experience.
reception you were anticipating?
No,
Like when you think about what
nobody
you
freaked out. I was really like, I was like everyone told me this would be a big deal, and no one's making it a big deal, which is good. Like I want to be treated like I was before, just as a person, but I really expected there to be like waves, and maybe those happened like between other people. Maybe there was a lot of talk, like who knows, right? But
yeah.
everyone was so professional. And that's all that matters. Like, of course people are going to be curious. Of course people are going to like be like, "What? Really? Like is everything okay in the head?" Like those reactions happen. And it happens for anything in the military, not just this. And so I was just so thankful that because of my 15 years of service, um, because I was an officer, because I was a pilot, I think all that helped. And they knew me and they knew me well. And so when I came out, I said, "Look, this is just what I need to do. I'm still the same person. Basically, you can call me Joe, whatever, like same pragmatic approach." And I was the first trans person a lot of these people ever had experience with. And I was the first one in my unit to transition that I know of. And definitely the first pilot in Virginia for the Army National Guard to transition. So I was pioneering in a way, like I was figuring
Yeah.
out the policies for aviators and helping work with like my flight surgeon because nobody knew. Like it's such a rare thing. Um, and so
Yeah.
but everyone has been great, very respectful. A lot of people reached out and offered support privately to me from the unit, which was really kind. But even folks that don't, like I walk by them, they still salute me. They call me Joe, just like they did before. We chit chat about things, like we said before. I don't make it my personality, and I think that puts everyone else at ease that they're not on eggshells around me.
Yeah, no, and I think what else would you allude to is like you were obviously very very well respected in your unit before. You had a close group of friends and confidants. People trusted
Hmm.
you. We talk about one of the keys to a successful transition in the workplace is sort of how do you set the stage? Like before you even make any announcements, is like,
Hmm.
and I've often advised people who are in this situation is like make yourself irreplaceable or make yourself
Yep.
invaluable. Like the more people like you and the more people recognize your worth and having you around, the more leeway they're going to
Yeah,
give
it
you
won't
to
matter that you're
and so
trans. It won't
it
matter,
won't matter.
right?
And
Yeah,
also, they want to keep you around because they
right.
like you and because you're playing you know, personally, or you're playing a very
Yeah,
important role in the team that would be missed if they decided to make this to make this the center of a
right.
cause against you.
And I didn't
And
want to
often
be
this,
fanfare and stuff. I didn't want
yeah,
I didn't want people to like celebrate me coming out or like I didn't want any of that. And this private job was the same way. Super supportive. They're like, "Okay, cool. What's your name and pronouns?" Like it was just like a matter of fact, let's drive on. And not too long after I got promoted, like it wasn't it didn't se it seemed like a very non-event that I thought would be a big event.
so were there ways, like, even in this environment that you noticed, even though, you weren't trying to make a big deal of it, that people were treating you differently, either positively or negatively? Like, just and, I know a lot of us when we transition, especially in the workplace, there are ways that we want to be treated and sort of seen as
Mhm.
female, and then there's also a lot of things that come along with being female that probably most women will tell you that they don't exactly welcome in terms of you know um, how far your word goes, or
Right.
your things like people might start questioning your strength, your stamina, or your ability to complete a task that you might have done before. Um, did you find any of those elements, in the military, or was it kind of just like people still were like, "This is the same old Joe"?
Same old Joe. So I haven't found any of that experience with all the people that knew me before, but I do find that with people who are meeting me for the first time. Not in the military, but just in general. I do get the, "Oh, you're treating me uh, like I don't know what I'm talking about," or whatever. And some of that is why I haven't really worked on my voice at all. Like, A, it
Yeah.
doesn't bother me, but B, having a guy's voice has authority. Like, I'm sorry to say it, like, it's really tough to have a female voice when you are making calls on the radio. You're dealing with air traffic, and there are great women pilots. I'm not saying their voice. Men respond differently to a female voice than they do a male's voice, and people in general tend to respond
And do you
differently.
find that, even obviously there's female officers and female
Yeah, of
pilots,
course.
who are natal and speak with whatever voice they developed as, naturally. Um, do you find the same thing for them, that they don't that whether it's intentional or unintentional, that men don't listen to that voice with the same, even when they're trying to speak authoritatively?
I find that, yeah. And I find that some, this is anecdotal, I found that some female pilots take on a deeper resonance.
Yeah,
There are a lot of, uh, deeper voiced women in the military because they have to speak from their chest, is what you call it. Like, versus up here, you're speaking down low and putting command and power behind it. Whereas if you speak kind of like floaty and more of your stereotypical feminine voice, it's just not considered serious by a lot of people. And I don't know why that is. I've always taken everyone seriously, but it's like I don't know what it is. I'm not a social scientist to understand it, but there is something there because when I have tried to do a more feminine take, um, I notice a different I get treated differently than when I come in
yeah,
and say, "No, this is what I want, this is what I'm doing," and I speak in my authority voice or guy voice,
yeah,
really. And so, like, it's really impacted my desire to change my voice, but then also, like, it doesn't make me super dysphoric unless I would say if unless someone else brings it up and they're like, "Oh, but your voice was so strikingly different." But then some people are like, "I don't even notice that you have a guy's voice." And on the microphone, it sounds a little bit lower than in person, of course. But
yeah,
so
yeah.
it's a mixed bag.
Mine does too. Yeah,
It's a mixed bag. So one day maybe
yeah,
I'll work on it, but like I'm definitely not going to get voice surgery. Like I don't feel like I need to do that, and more power to anyone who does.
yeah. And I think also the thing with voice, I think any of us who've had parents, when mom gets mad, you know it.
Yeah. It
And
gets
it's usually
lower
because
and more
the
aggressive.
voice
Yeah.
gets lower and more authoritative.
Yeah.
Like, less some of us are shriekers, but when mom gets mad, it's like, oh,
Yep.
she's
And she
using her
uses
serious
all your
voice.
names too, right? It's never just
Yeah,
your first name. It's your first, middle, and
exactly.
last.
But yeah, so it sounds like, the military was a very welcoming environment. And of course, now we're
Yeah.
living through this new era of, especially since January 20th, of a lot of the obviously the increased attention towards
Hmm.
trans people. And I don't have to rehash the entire sort of state of play of the law right now, but where there was a
Sure.
directive that sought to separate all trans people from the military. I know that's now been held up in court, and it's going to be going through a variety of different legal
Mhm.
processes. Um, like, obviously, you're a highly competent person, and I'm sure your close colleagues recognize you're a highly competent person. Do you get a sense in general that there is a major separation between like the rank and file military, the people who are actually have the fortune of working with someone like yourself, and leadership or media or whatever is driving this politics, whatever is
Yeah.
driving this? Like, so what have your colleagues told you, like when they see this kind of swirling around in the background, in terms of how this is going to impact you?
They don't want to lose me. They would find it very unfortunate that almost $1 million worth of training is going to get flushed down the drain. Like $1 million plus 15 years of experience, which you don't
Yeah,
get even if you hire someone tomorrow. You don't get that. And just like any soldier, you can have bad soldiers. And so I'm sure there are examples of trans soldiers that aren't great soldiers.
yeah,
But
like any
that's
person.
but that's how a command looks at at who they're in charge of. Their subordinates, they look at them and they say, who are my good soldiers and who are my soldiers that need a little work and who do I need to get rid of? And it's not like they go across and go, well, trans people are always great or always bad, right? It's they look at the soldier as an individual, um, and how they contribute to the team. Are they disruptive or not? And I'm not. I don't disrupt the unit. I get asked to teach classes at the unit because of my knowledge, and also an interesting thing is when I came out, a lot of the females, which I was nervous about making uncomfortable, they kind of came and rallied towards me. Like they were, I ended up making more friends after coming out than even before. And that's not to say coming out gives you friends, but people really appreciated the honesty and the authenticity, I think, because they knew I was just like we spoke before. They knew I was
Decent folk.
cosplaying as a guy and they could tell there was something odd. And then that's all gone now. And they say that they have the most like honest version of Joe they've ever had. And that attracts people. That attracts people to someone who's that authentic and willing to take a huge risk for who they are. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I think from a commander's perspective, they want a competent fighting force that meets the standard, and that's how believe it should be as well. I meet the standard. I'm not disruptive. I've never had any issues since coming out, and everyone that I talk to wants me flying and in the unit. Like no one's like, I can't wait to get rid of you because they see me as valuable because I was a valuable soldier before and I still
absolutely.
am today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, not just like the military sunk a lot of money into you, and it's kind of silly to
Yeah.
throw that away for no good reason.
From a Doge
But
perspective, it's wasteful.
it's wasteful,
Yeah.
exactly. And and I think the other thing you mentioned, which I think is also helpful for counting across the narrative, is there's a lot of these narratives going around that women feel threatened, that we're taking over womanhood from them. And I have to
Right.
admit, I had the exact same experience as you did, which is that when I transitioned, a lot of the women I worked with were kind of like, "Come on in, like, welcome to the team," as
Yeah.
opposed to like being resentful that I was coming in and claiming something that shouldn't be mine. Like they were happy to pick one off, in a sense, for
Right.
their team. It's good to hear, even in, this was back in 2002 when I came out at work,
Wow.
but
Yeah.
even in 2024, that despite what's being said in the media, that most women who get to know a trans person are kind of like, or know a person as being a good person, they're kind of like, "Hey, you're one of us now,"
Well, and
regardless of
women
what
are
our.
caring, right? Like
Yeah,
they don't, they're just typically like really nice, good people. And some men too. And I mean, I went out of my way to make sure that I was trying to be their ally in their space as well. Like I would carry tampons, for example, on training exercises, and women would ask me for them, and like I don't need one, but like I wanted to show that like not only am I grateful that you're welcoming me into your space, but I'm also want to participate. Like I want to be helpful in this space. I brought in like nice smelling soap to the barracks, like when we did a training exercise, which is something a lot of female soldiers do, because you want
yeah,
to have a little something and tampons and gummy bears. Like I was like, here, available to anybody. Like I'm your friend here. Like I'm not trying to just take
Yeah.
over. And I was very respectful and like I would wait until the showers were not really being used before I would go in and like I was trying to really stress to them that I'm not gonna walk in like I own this space. I'm gonna treat it as I'm a guest in this space.
So, like, one of obviously the big story with you is that, the reason that you've come to my attention, as well as just to national attention, was obviously this event that
It
took
wasn't my good
place.
looks.
Well, your good looks were very helpful. It certainly eased the path. And I'm not saying that facetiously. These things, for whatever reason, for better or worse, do
Yeah.
matter. But is you know, it sounds like if you had your druthers and this didn't happen. Of course, we're referring to the sort of false accusation, which we'll talk about in a little more detail in a second. Is most of us just want to get on with our lives
Hmm.
and whatever form that may be, and not sort of stand out and become a public figure. So, did you have any visions of being a public figure? Small role, big role, um, prior to the event. And the event, of course, I'm referring to, which you're going to know a lot better than I will, was being falsely accused of being the helicopter pilot whose plane accidentally hit a passenger airliner over the Potomac River, I believe in January of this year.
Yep.
And during the media narrative, during sort of the time where people are still trying to figure out the situation, um, a online personality accused you of being the pilot
Right.
who had crashed the helicopter into this
I'd
plane.
committed a trans terrorist attack.
Yes.
That was the one of the quotes. Or
So
another
if this
another
hadn't
trans
have
terrorist
happened,
attack. Hmm.
do you suspect you would have found your way to advocacy or to public figurehood, or is
Nope.
this something that you were completely thrust into?
I was completely thrust into, and I know it's going to be a fun narrative to say that that I want all this to happen, and I wanted like to have a I don't. I work a great job. Like I don't make any money doing what I'm doing now with you or any of the media I've done. I haven't made a dime. It's actually taken away from my ability to earn income because I've had to take off of work. And I was a private person, and while I had like my little Facebook account that was heavily locked down to people that I let in, so like friends and friends of friends, like it was very tight controlled. Never made public posts, always kept those locked down. I was hard to search because I'm military and like you have to be apolitical or you're risking your job as an officer. And then you also, as I was coming out, I didn't want anyone to like find anything about me and like blow it up, right? And make a big deal
Yeah.
about it. And so I I violated my rule. I decided to speak up about my time in the service. And I did that through a former boss, Michael Smerconish. I wrote an essay about he really wanted to humanize the trans military issue because he said not many
Now,
people
was this
know.
after? This was after the event?
No, this is before.
Before?
Yeah, so before the event, and this is very key to why the event happened.
I see,
So
because it can be a
yeah,
public presence of some sort.
so worked for Michael, and I had been on SiriusXM with Michael before as his employee, and like just chit chatted as a guy about helicopters and stuff. So like I'd been exposed, but no one cared because I wasn't trans, right? Like no one made a fuss about it. Um, wrote this essay about basically what we talked about, like where I come from and why I needed to transition and how everyone supports me and how I've met the standard. And I I didn't call out the president really in that essay at all. I just said like this is me, this is my story as a trans service member and I want to continue to serve. That was really the bottom line of that article. That was released on let's see, Tuesday night. The crash was on Wednesday, January 29th, so this was the 28th. That was released Tuesday night, and then Michael on Wednesday, the day of the crash, said, "Hey, how about you come on in the morning and I'll just have you on air on SiriusXM and we'll just talk about your essay and really put a face to the type of people that are going to be kicked out because I don't think people realize who they're kicking out. I think they think, it's not great soldiers and like you have a good service record." So I spoke about that. and that was released as a podcast as well, so it was available to anyone, not just SiriusXM subscribers. And that evening is when the crash happened, and it came from a helicopter that was originated in Virginia out of Fort Belvoir. And by Thursday night, I was being named as the unknown female pilot that nobody knew who it was, and Trump had made comments about it being DEI, and because he just knew it was, and he wasn't giving a lot of information, so it was very vague. And so that sent the right wing um, Twitter sphere or X sphere into a frenzy of like, let's find out who this pilot is because it's a DEI person. This is because of DEI that this crash happened. And so when you type in Black Hawk pilot, Virginia, right, that day, I was
Yeah,
fresh into the world. I was fresh into SEO. And so I don't know why I was tied or made up as the rumor, but my guess is that
but
because
great
of that
story.
essay, yeah, because of the essay and because of my interview, it was a great story. And because my very difficult to find social media presence, people couldn't tell if I was alive or not. And they didn't want to take the time to find out. So they just cooked up a
Ran,
rumor.
ran with the scoop.
And yeah, they cooked up a rumor and they turned it into it was a manifesto. It wasn't a cry to continue serving, but it was a manifesto and my anger towards Trump. And they picked out the part where I talked about how I was still spiritual and finding conversion into Judaism and finding acceptance into that. And they said, oh, trans terrorist was also converting to being a Jew. And like they were really driving the outrage of anti-Semitism and anti-trans rhetoric that X exists. And by Friday, I became the number two trending topic in the U.S. Uh, just after the crash. So it was the crash, and then it was my name, like, which is crazy. And Friday morning, I got some text messages from friends saying that people were tying me to the crash, and I was like, "What? Like, this is just because of this essay? Like, someone's, a crackpot out there making stuff up." I got a call from the Daily Mail asking if I was alive and if I knew what was happening to me, which I've never spoken to the Daily Mail. I don't know how they got my phone number. And that kind of startled me. So I reached out to my unit to talk to my public affairs officer and also let them know like what was going on. And they were already aware and contacting me at the same time. And it was a big flurry that morning of calls and back and forth. But I made a video saying a proof of life video, and I made it publicly on my Facebook page so everyone could see it. And I saw thousands of message requests in my Facebook profile because those were open.
Yeah,
And I was overwhelmed by the size of it all. And so I quickly armed myself and arranged for private security, armed security for my family because in Virginia, property records are publicly available. There's no
yeah,
masking of that. So my legal name was being shared. A bunch of my old pre-transition socials like Reddit and Instagram were being shared. And so like my fear was my family's safety. And
yeah.
I didn't have time to think about anything else. And so I went into soldier mode and prepared for that whole weekend. And then Saturday morning, I appeared on CNN live with Michael Smerconish to talk about it. And that's kind of what kicked off this whole thing of just my
Yeah,
life
no,
is forever changed. My life is forever
it's really neat. Like,
changed.
to bring this back to your SEER training about like preparing for the worst
Yeah.
and building the skills and the resilience to sort of handle whatever's thrown at you. And obviously that's done in the setting of like, what if the enemy gets you and has you behind enemy lines and they're
Right.
interrogating you? Here you are
Well,
now, probably.
propaganda is such a big piece of that training. Like, obviously, if you're captured, the enemy would love to get you to say something bad about the president or like turn it into a propaganda piece. And so it's like I inadvertently had media training without realizing it because I was trained as a soldier, like if I'm captured, what to say and what not to say to the media and how it can be taken out of
And
context and
basically,
stuff.
you were captured. You were now, the
I
enemy in this case
was.
was perhaps the right-wing press
The
or the
whole
Twitter
internet
sphere or
wanted
whatever.
me. The whole internet
Um,
either thought I was dead or the whole
yeah,
internet wanted me dead. It was a mix of both.
yeah. And
So that
clearly it
was
fit
that
into
was
like
it.
a narrative that fit because we recognize there's, as people are increasingly trying to demonize trans people, looking for real world examples of, oh,
Yes, of
here's
us
another
being
trans terrorist, here's
unstable.
another
Yeah,
unstable, off kilter trans person doing
violent.
a horrible, terrible thing. And it's sort of like they want that narrative to be true so badly
Yep.
that they were willing to jump on the tiniest thread of
It's a
of
juicy story, though,
possibility,
right? It's a juicy
juicy
story.
story that
Trans Black
that would
Hawk
make
pilot who's about to get kicked out. Like
does this
must have
crazy
gotten
thing.
upset and crashed their helicopter on purpose. Um, it's crazy, of course, because I was alive. So I was like, this is the weirdest thing because it's so easy to disprove the entire rumor. It's like, I'm alive, so therefore it's not true. But we saw this. We saw this with Uvalde and a bunch of shootings. Like the 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 ex trolls of the right love to jump on. It's an unstable, violent, aggressive trans person. Like
Yeah,
it happens all the time. And now it's Jews. Like now there's a lot of anti-Semitism again on X running wild. And they're saying like, oh, don't worry, like Jews won't crash the planes. They'll just make sure that the planes crash. Like it's just so crazy to me. I just don't understand it. Like, I mean, I understand anti-Semitism, but I just don't understand why in a world where we can easily call someone and make sure they're alive or validate sources, like it's so easy today, and yet we do it less than we've ever done it before.
yeah. I do think there's a lot of bad faith actors who recognize that we live in a world with a lot of gullible people, a lot of people who want to believe certain narratives, and there's
Yeah.
certainly a profit incentive to get
Well,
people
that's the
to
thing. It's
apply
the
information that,
monetization of
yeah,
outrage. Yeah,
yeah, and or fame. Just like this is the quickest way to
sure.
become a name is by saying outlandish things and hoping they draw attention, whether they're true or
Yeah,
sourced or not. And yeah, they happen to catch you in it, so now you're famous. Now you are,
kind of.
I don't know if it's enough that like my parents would know who you are, but people know who you are.
They do.
Um, you're doing
Forever
a lot of
changed.
media. You're getting platformed in places that probably as Joe Ellis, private citizen slash military member would probably not have gotten. Um, how have you been dealing with being a, for lack of a better term, at some level, a celebrity in this world?
Well, definitely in the trans space, I'm really known. In the military space, I'm really known because of those two main topics of the rumor. And then in DC, it's 100 miles away. I go up there all the time. I get recognized on the street. Richmond, I get recognized as well, which is my home city that I'm living in, and I get recognized. I don't know if it'll be friendly recognition or not. It's weird because, like you said, even if someone wanted to bring me on a podcast or something, before or a media interview or something big, like I don't know if I would have taken it if it hadn't been about my service. Like that's the only reason why I did Michael's piece. And look what happened as soon as I popped my head out. I got accused of murdering, 67 people. But I was so careful to protect my integrity as a soldier and an officer that I wouldn't have been just talking about stuff like politically out publicly like this. So it's definitely nothing that I would have sought. And because it was unfortunate and it was thrust upon me, I didn't ask for it. Um, I consider it like lightning. Like you can get struck by lightning and get electrocuted, or maybe you can harness it, right? And I'm trying to harness that lightning that came my way and turn it into something good. I'm trying to get that DeLorean to go into the future or something, not trying to
Yeah,
get electrocuted by it and die. So, so that's kind of where I'm at. And I also want to hold people accountable, for what happened to me because that was a tragedy that we should have been mourning as a nation over. I think it had been 16 years since something that tragic had happened. It was very tragic to the Army aviation community because those are our fellow pilots and crew members that I know people who work at that unit. I know people who worked on that helicopter. Like I know people
yeah,
who knew those
these
people. They
real
knew their
people.
families, they knew the kids of those crew members. And so it's so tragic that they might have cracked open their iPhone news or a website, and instead of seeing people coming to support them and gather around them in a shared mourning, they were seeing a trans person being blamed for it and terrible things being said about me, and it just distracting from the whole story. And then they finally released the pilot's name and they drug her through the mud too. And it was just like, is this really what we want as a nation? And maybe I'm idealistic, maybe I'm quixotic, but I believe we can be better than this. You know what? Even if it's 1%.
Yeah,
Elections are won by percent, like 1%, not
percentages.
by
Yeah,
not by overwhelming majorities. And so whether it's elections or whether it's just people thinking, taking a few more seconds before they type something out on a keyboard that have millions of followers, before they say something that really is damaging and threatening to somebody, putting my life in danger, for example, and taking away from a tragic event. It's just, we've got to be better, and we've got to demand better and ask for better. And I don't know what that looks like, except for my defamation case. That's one avenue
Yeah.
I'm using, is trying to hold someone accountable.
Hold people
Yeah, so I'm suing Matt Wallace, who we don't know for sure if he started it, but he definitely was
propagated.
likely the first to tie my likeness to the rumor and use a picture of me, but also had the biggest impact because 2.3, 2.4 million followers. Um, if it hadn't been for him, or say if it wasn't him I was suing, if it hadn't been for someone like him, it would not have been the number two trending topic. I would have not felt for safety. Like, a lot of these things wouldn't have happened. So when you have an account like that, you should have more of a responsibility and culpability to these things. And so
Yeah.
I'm exercising the law, and I'm suing them in federal court.
No, and I think that's actually really important, like to hold people when we can to account. Like I
Yeah.
think a lot of stuff gets said about people. Like, there's probably not a trans person who's prominent on social media that hasn't been accused of, let's say, being a pedophile
Right.
or being a sex offender or being a
Well, I get
pervert.
called a pedophile all the time.
Yeah, as do I.
Yeah.
And I haven't sued anyone for it because most of these people are anonymous accounts and it's not worth the trouble of me dragging them out to figure out
You
who
don't
they
have
are.
100 grand to spend in court with someone.
Oh, I do. But
Well, you know what I
but
mean, like to waste,
yeah,
like,
it's sort of like doing it for the right purposes.
right,
But I wish there was sort of more of a mechanism to when people throw those kind of terms around, like this is what defamation law is for,
right,
to really hold people's feet to the fire because I think people aren't going to stop doing this on their own account. They're not going to stop
right,
because it's like the right or wrong thing to do. They're going to stop because it's going to kill them in their bank accounts or cost them
right.
their reputations.
Yeah, and
And
and if
so
I
I
win
applaud you for
anything,
yeah, I applaud you for doing this.
no, thank
Um,
you. No, if I win
you know,
anything, I'm donating it to the families of the crash. And if they don't want it, like, I'm gonna donate to an association of aviation. Like, I'm not doing this to enrich myself. And I think that's key. But what's strange is along this path and journey of being platformed for something I didn't do, I'm getting a lot of feedback from people that I'm a refreshing voice
absolutely.
to this
We
whole
are talking for
thing.
2 hours now.
Right, to this whole thing, right? And that struck me even more bizarrely because I'm like, wait, like, I'm just a nobody. Like, 2 months ago, no one who knew who I was, and now you're saying I have a voice and I'm being invited to things I would have never been invited to. And so, like I said with the lightning, or like trying to make lemonade out of lemons, I would have rather this never have happened, but I love to fall back on my nerdum and talk about Lord of the Rings. And there's a scene where Frodo says, "I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had ever happened." Right? Because Frodo's doing a very courageous, noble thing. He's taking the ring to destroy it when it's inherently evil and corrupting. And Gandalf, the wizard, looks at him and says, "Well, so do all who live to see such times." But it's not for them to decide. All you can decide is what you do when it's given to you. Like, what do you
Yeah,
make of the time that's given to you? And so I could go back and as much as I can, like, I'm forever changed. But I didn't have to sue, right? I didn't have to do all these extra media tour, like, not tours, but like interviews and stuff. I could have just kind of tried to go back into obscurity
you
as
could have let
best
your
as I
15
can.
minutes pass.
I could have, but or I
Yeah,
could I could do what people are telling me is so refreshing. They're like, "We want you speaking." And it's so weird to me because I'm just a nobody. And they're like, "No, like, you're a very important voice and we think you can make a difference." Like, and these aren't like political, like, um operatives telling me this. This is everyday people just messaging me randomly, DMing me like, "Oh, I saw your interview. Thank you. Like, that really resonated with me," or this or that. And I realize there's such a thirst for everyday, normal trans voices. And that's what led me to being on X and linking up with you and realizing there's a huge need right now. And
yeah,
because service is in my blood, I feel the need to answer the call. And I will
yeah.
gladly serve where I can serve. And if everyone tells me, "Look, we're done with you, like, go back and be quiet," I will gladly leave. Like, I've got a career, I've got things to do. My life would be a lot easier if I wasn't doing all this extra stuff, but I believe it's important.
Yeah, and it, like as you alluded to, like the reason I reached out to you, like I think I was probably one of these thousands of people that did sort of send you a private message, kind of like an admiring private message for both feeling badly for what you've been through and wanting to sort of understand a little bit more about you, was precisely because I'm sure, like a lot of people who have this background, I saw a lot of commonality in terms of like here is just a person who has transitioned but is just doing her job, not trying to make waves, just like, in the military, obviously in a very successful, in a very structured environment. And, like, and having this philosophy of how important it is to have these kind of voices which have not been prominent in the trans community for a number of different reasons. Like, I think a lot of us don't want to be public because we are just trying to live our lives.
Right.
But in the end, because we're not public, the narrative of what a trans person is gets, is tends to be represented by people who maybe are having less success or less interest in just being.
Yeah.
And so it's very refreshing. And even though like it was obviously a tragedy that brought you into the public eye, your willingness to sort of be out there and say, this is what I want you to think of when you think of a trans person. And
Right.
if you should be tempted to be thinking of restricting the rights or thinking badly about trans people or you applying the worst possible stereotypes, that we think of people like you and many others. And so I'm really glad that this is sort of where you landed. I think like a lot of trans people, I'll be honest, when the rumor first came, and I probably came about it the same way that a lot of people did, by just sort of picking it up on Twitter. Like I think a lot of our first thoughts were like, first of all, don't be true, don't be true, don't be true, don't be
Right.
true.
Please don't be true. Yeah.
Please don't be true. And then the second was, once he sort of came to the public, was please be normal.
Right.
Because, we tend to often get people who are not necessarily representing us in the best light. Not necessarily that they're bad people, they just don't
Right.
show well. And I thought, okay, this is a relief. Here's someone who really has her stuff together, who is doing important work, sounds reasonable and sane. And I was like, this is a person that I need to get to know because I want to do things. I'd love to be able
Yeah.
to work with you and do things together. I'm glad this brought us. I'm so glad this brought us together.
Same. Same. No,
Yeah,
and I really admire you. And this is my attempt to I want to be known for something I did do, not for something I didn't do, right? And like to go
yeah,
down
so
as the
true.
person, right? To go down as the person who was rumored to have killed all those people as this trans person, and like I if I'm going to be known, I don't want that to be my story. And so now I am writing my own story and setting the record straight that no, I am someone who's capable of doing great things and leaving a lasting impact, and that's one of my values, is to leave a lasting impact in people I come in contact with. And while the attention and fame, I'm not going to lie, as a middle child, it's nice, but it's nice because I'm also helping people. And so while that's an aspect of it, it definitely isn't my driver. I would have loved to have been known for being a good actor in a movie, or um, achieving something in aviation, right? Like, I would love to be known, if I'm going to be known, I would love to be known for doing something good, something something courageous or incredible. I don't want to be known for someone who didn't do the thing. And so
Yeah,
here I am trying to write a whole new story, and hopefully that's the least interesting thing about me as well. Is not only is it not that interesting that I'm trans, but it's also not that interesting that I was in that rumor, and look at all these other things that this person has done instead.
yeah. No, I think there's a lot of ways that people can use. We all see people, who get thrust into fame or thrust into
Yeah.
notoriety, who use that for their own purposes.
I could have
Um,
started my own crypto.
you could have been the Hawk Two. You could have had the Hawk Tuah coin,
Black Hawk
and
Tua coin.
but
That's what I was
Black.
gonna launch. I was gonna launch the Black Hawk Tua coin. Get in on the ground floor,
There's still
Laura.
time.
There's
There is
still
still time.
time, right? Like, or like my own podcast, right? But like I talked to you about this. This is so important to me that this is not a podcast that's Joe Ellis's new influencer profile. This is a podcast that is named not by
But where can
me.
I buy your merch?
Right, right, right. Yeah, but the idea is like, even when it comes to this, I don't want this to be about me being an influencer or anything like that. I don't want to make a brand out of this. I want to make effective change, which is why this is a coalition of like-minded people trying to find common sense. You and me are the hosts, but anyone one day could be the host of this podcast because it's called TransNormal. It's not called the Joe and Laura Show. And that's very
Exactly.
important to me too, that even the things I'm choosing to do, I'm trying to make sure they still align with my values that I had before I had a profile, which is very important to me.
Okay. Now, the other thing that we have in common, um, among many things, is I'm sure all our viewers will notice the necklace around. So this is a Jewish star. We talked earlier, obviously, about you've been raised
I'm
in
just
a
virtue signaling here. This is popular, so
yeah, Jews have always been super popular, super beloved by all.
yeah.
Yeah, the quickest way to have everybody love you and to be lauded, of course, is to be Jewish.
Especially a
Um,
trans Jew. I'm a
especially
double
especially a
love.
trans. Yes. Um, so so well, I'm just sort of curious about sort of what was sort of attractive about the Jewish way of being or about Judaism that has sort of led you on this journey to where I understand obviously you're now a practicing Jew and you're going through the conversion process.
Yeah.
Um, how did that come to pass?
It's a weird one. I call it I'm a Jew in training, you know. But yeah, I'm going through the conversion process at a conservative synagogue. Um, Conservative, not Republican, Democrat, conservative, but conservative
Yeah.
as in conserving the traditions and the Hebrew language and certain practices. For those that don't know. And then uh, it's weird. So like I said, I grew up with like a lot of Messianic Jewish exposure, and so I always valued like those examples. And then I was Christian, and I thought that was what I was supposed to be because that's all I knew. And so when I started transitioning, I had kind of, even before I started transitioning, even years before, maybe 2017, I kind of fallen out of a lot of the hardcore Christian practice I was doing. And so by the time I transitioned, I hadn't really gone to a church in a while and a few other things, and I knew I wouldn't be welcomed back anyway. And so I figured now's my chance to try a religion that I'm actually interested in. And Judaism was always this thing I was admiring from afar. Even so much as going to Holocaust sites in Europe, like walking into the crematorium one at Auschwitz, in Auschwitz-Birkenau and seeing the camps, seeing Schindler's factory, going to the Jewish quarter in Krakow, which is also where the home of the ghetto was,
Yeah.
and so many things, right? This shared mourning with the Jewish people, and also because of Christianity having its roots in Judaism, as in, Jesus was a Jew. Um, I don't know, like it felt familiar, but also it felt like something I wasn't allowed to be a part of. And so I always kind of had longed to be a part of it. Even though I didn't quite understand everything about it, I would do reading occasionally and stuff, and just felt connected to them. And I was wanting some spiritual practice back in my life after transitioning because that is still important to me. And so I decided to look for a local synagogue and look for a introduction course. I was like, I just want to learn about it. And so I started that last year around October. And within a few months, I quickly realized that this is definitely something I want to do. I probably want to pursue conversion once I'm ready. And so maybe in another year or so, I'll be ready.
Right. You have a Hebrew name figured out?
No, I mean, I already have a Hebrew name, but I don't know if I'll do a whole new name. I might
Yeah. No.
just stick
Yeah.
with what I have.
Yeah, no, like Judaism, it's a because it's a non-evangelical religion. Like we don't go out seeking new
Mhm.
members, but we can't. But the contrast is we're very welcoming and always appreciative
Very,
when people show an interest. And I know if you're someone who is feeling adrift in terms of your religious identification, I obviously know Christianity, of course, a very diverse group of people. But there are obviously sects that are tend to be less embracing versus more embracing of diversity.
yeah,
And I find the Jewish community in general, have always been one of the first, at least when it comes to social trends, of
yeah,
being much more embracing of diversity and much more embracing of uh, not even strangeness, but just sort of people who are um, iconoclastic in
Mhm.
different ways. That there's a lot of different ways to be a Jew, and as long as you stick up for each other, like, and part of this is sort of this the Titans community is this willingness to stick up with each other, even when you know you have differences in
Right.
opinion, differences of ways of being.
Because everyone
Is
wants
that
to kill you anyway? Yeah.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
that when the cards are down, it doesn't matter whether I like you or whether I thought you did the right thing here, whether I agreed with your lifestyle or what you voted
Mhm.
this out. It's sort of like we're all Jews now, and we're all in this together,
Yeah.
and all that stuff's behind us. And so so I think part of that really makes it embracing of even if someone might disagree with like, oh, this isn't really for me, but if it comes down to being a Jew, we're on Team Jew here together.
Yeah.
And I find that always that has been one of the things about the community, even though, like I said, I'm not observant. I don't go to synagogue. I keep traditions, but that thing of knowing that if something happens, that I've got people in my corner is always something I find very reassuring and very welcoming. And I'm
So
glad
true.
it's something you noticed about us too.
Yeah, so true. Like I got nothing but a warm embrace, showing up and looking lost and looking clueless in the synagogue, going to services and stuff. It's very egalitarian, the conservative synagogue I'm at, which is nice. But it goes back to even my Christian values of like making the world a better place. The Jews believe in what's called tikkun olam, which is
Yeah,
a commandment to repair the world. And so that drives me, even with the platforming and the profiling. And like, I could have gone back into obscurity ish, maybe, but I want to repair the world. And if I have a platform that allows me to do that even more, and I really love the practice of 6 days a week, Jews repair the world, and one day a week, they appreciate the world for as it is. And, you know, that's the Sabbath, that's Shabbat. So,
yeah,
I just love that approach, and I love the more observant that the conservative community is, and so I'm learning a lot more about certain practices, and many of them walk to the synagogue, like they don't drive, they don't do anything, they honor a lot of the laws of Shabbat, which is really interesting to learn it from that point of view. And a lot of them are converts, like there's former LDS, there's former Muslims in there. Like it's a big welcoming community, and so I really love that aspect too, and very queer friendly, which is nice.
yeah. Well, welcome. So I know we all the rest of our days to get on to. It's been really like, even though I know we host this podcast together, it's been absolutely wonderful to be able to sit down for as long as we have and really hear about you and your journey. And it's just sort of has reconfirmed everything that I've thought about you and everything that sort of has attracted me to want to know more about you. It's been
Oh,
has been confirmed, and I'm sure any people who happen to be listening to this later will probably share my perspective and realize that whatever they might come into this thinking about transness or not, that at your root you're a fantastic person, and it's always great to have fantastic people fighting for causes that you believe in. And so I'm really glad that I've had the chance to get to know you, be able to work with you, and be willing to help share your story with anybody who might be listening to this podcast later.
thank you so much, Laura, and I feel very similar about you. I can't wait to turn the tables and learn more about
Oh,
you growing up. And um, this is probably our record long podcast, I think.
of the two,
We're
yeah.
getting to Joe Rogan length though, like maybe 3 hours I think on this puppy. But it's been wonderful just talking to you, and I'm so excited to go somewhere with you as far as this podcast and what we're trying to advocate for, and hopefully leave a lasting impact on the
Yeah.
world in a good way.
Yeah, like I said, the ultimate goal of doing this podcast is obviously not just getting for us to get to know each other better, but it's really to make change in the world.
Hmm.
We know we see the problem in front of us, and we know that we're both blessed with some degree of both through our positions and our attitudes and our personalities to perhaps be able to make some of this positive change. And I'm glad we're going to be able to do that, or hopefully we'll be able to do that together. And I look forward to, like I said, you turning the tables, as you say, and me having to spill my guts a little bit about what it was like for me to be me.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, have a great day,
Yep, see
and
ya.
bye, everybody.
Bonus segment, we also talked about public school systems, parenting, and homeschool, and the differences between the US and Canadian systems. And so We weren't sure where to put this, so we decided just to tack this on at the end. Enjoy.
And so when I came up here this morning to sort of set up the podcast, there were two kids sleeping here, and so they're good about it. They're uh, 14-year boys don't often take to being woken up before like 11 a.m.
Right.
But at around 7:55, they managed to sort of rouse themselves up and left behind a little bit of a mess that I had to tidy up, but nothing that was too unpresentable. The one thing I should mention, it does not smell like teenage boy in here, which is always another concern when you have a number of them here. So, and anyways, I know we're starting a little later than we were planning, but I've got my coffee. I've got me. I'm all put together. The room seems to look at least as
Yeah.
nice as I can make it. It does need a few touches, I have to admit, but for now, I think it's serviceable.
Well, even if it did smell like teenage boy in there, thank God smell-o-vision is not a thing, right? Like
No, no, we don't have to share it with every.
Right.
Yes, it would have been my personal torment, aside
Right.
from what I'd be sharing with you. But um, you think after a while, like living with teenage boys, you would get used to sort of a lot of the, the cornucopia of odors that tends to be associated with.
Do y'all have
But
Axe body spray there, or is it called something
um,
else? Is it called like
yeah,
Lynx?
we do have Axe body spray, but one of my boys is very into, and I don't know if this is a thing among teenage boys in general, but has gotten very into fragrances and
Oh,
sort of scans the internet looking for obscure fragrances that he has ordered to his house with his sort of allowance or other money he managed to scramble together from birthdays and Christmas and
interesting. I mean,
yeah.
when I
So
was a teen, it was all about in Europe, I think it's called Lynx, but here it's called Axe body spray. And so like everyone was just dousing themselves in it, and it was so strong and like it was stinky because it was so much of it. So we always joke that like teenage boys just smell like a cloud of Axe body spray.
we don't have Axe. We have Axe in Canada. But my boys are not sort of into that.
That's good.
Uh, yeah, but I also think the downside of this is my fragrance boy. Um, also, I think often uses it as a substitute for grooming. It's sort of like if I can sort of spray enough of this cologne on me,
Yeah, I can't
then I will
shower,
still
so
smell good. Yeah, as a substitute for like showering or like, but like I'm assuming at some point, they've got a few years ahead of them yet. They will become human and perhaps attractive to other people. But for now, like, and this is also a thing I have to admit, and is, and I don't know if this is just a boy thing, but like they're not. There's like no interest in partners right now. So I sort of remember when I was 14 or 15, there was at least, even though obviously I was a weirdo, but other people, in the class, there seemed to be a lot of people pairing off and dating at that point. And we
Yeah.
just don't hear it. Like there's like an odd thing when one of my boys mentions, oh, so and so seeing so and so. And like when I talk to my boys, it's like, oh, is there anyone you're looking at? Or is it, and I recognize I'm their mom. I'm not going to get straight answers. Like
Right.
that's, but at least, like the sense that they even like are concerned that they're like not dating or not interested in a partner. I'm presuming they're heterosexual. Like they seem that way in every other way,
Right.
but there's no sort of, even passing interest in kind of like, oh, why can't I get a girlfriend? Or even like just talk of the boys around the table. Like I just don't get that sense, and I sort of wonder how much of this is social media, how much of this is like there's like substitutes for so many relations that have like romantic relationships even among teenagers like been kind of replaced. I'm sure it's something Jonathan Haidt could probably tell us all about, but I don't know, and I don't know if among if you're seeing something similar or if
Well,
you
my
know if
stepdaughter is 17,
yeah.
and she hasn't really, from what I can tell, dated really anybody. I think she's had maybe a boyfriend or two here and there, but it's not the same for sure. It's not the same as when I was a teenager. Um, Getting your license immediately and dating was like the thing to do. Like as soon as I turned 16, I'm going to get my driver's license and I'm going to take girls on dates. Like that was not only me, but that was like the culture, right?
Yeah.
And this was the flip phone era. So we had cell phones, but we didn't have smartphones. We had Facebook, but it was on the computer. Or I guess it was more MySpace and Facebook at the same time as kind of that era. But with her, it's interesting because she just doesn't seem too interested in dating, which is great. Like I don't mean to push her in that direction. But it is interesting because while she probably because of my influence with cars, she wanted to get her license right away. Most of her friends don't, and they don't even need to because her their parents drive them everywhere. And it's just so weird to me because growing up, at least in the United States, like your license is your freedom because there is no easy public transportation in the suburbs. Like you can't go anywhere without a ride. And so like
Yeah.
getting your license is a big deal. And for her, she did right away, but most of her friends don't drive or barely drive. And it's like it's not a necessity because the parents are driving them to school, driving them everywhere. Like it's just a different world. And I don't know if that's a parental thing or also a combination of kids don't need to go out as much because they're on social media more or what it is.
Yeah, and I suspect it's a combination of things. I grew up in a medium-sized city in Canada. I grew up in Winnipeg, which is also sort of similar. There were buses, but they didn't always go where you needed to go at the times you needed them to go. And having a car was like independence. It was definitely like a major milestone. Like when you turn 15 and a half, it's like I have to get my license.
Yeah.
And when you're 16, it's like I need to get a car. And even if it wasn't about dating, it was just about having like the freedom, like to
Mhm.
go where you wanted to go and to do things without needing a parent overseeing it. And like
Yeah.
for me, like, a lot of that was sort of like acquiring a like acquiring a wardrobe,
Right.
which was something that was very hard to do. Like, before you're 16, once you had a car, it's sort of like you can go places, you can go shopping, you can sort of like shove stuff in the trunk, you can like that, like so. Obviously, for me, like what I was wanting out of freedom was maybe a little different than some of my classmates, but still that sort of drive to have like something, a place you could have, and the freedom to like separate yourself from your parents and
Right.
separate yourself from prying eyes was always like was such a major was such a big deal. And also because I was in a tight, I'm not going to say religious community, but cultural community. I grew up Jewish and in a very sort of tight, semi-insular community where everybody knew everybody's business. The ability to go like to the parts of town where the Jews weren't to do
Mm,
things was very freeing. I didn't have to
right.
worry about, oh, someone saw your son at the
Jewish
thrift
moms
store.
will gossip.
Oh yeah. Oh, like rifling through the women's clothes. It's like you should have a talk with him. Whereas I could drive like across town where there were no Jews and like have the freedom to do those kind of
Oh,
things. And
interesting.
yeah,
Okay, that you bring up an interesting point because our generational difference. I was able to order things online.
yeah. See, I didn't have that.
Right. So like it was
It
very
just
early
required my
on.
feet. Yeah, even though I
Yeah.
look like I'm in my 30s,
Right.
or I like to pretend that I look like I'm in my 30s. I was born in 1972, so I first got on the internet at the age of like 24. But you had that like all ready for you. You just got unmarked boxes, I'm sure.
Yeah, Oro marked boxes and my parents I remember they opened one time and I know they didn't believe it, but my excuse was, "Oh, I didn't order that. I ordered something else. They must have messed it up." You know, it was like from
Oh, that
Sears.
happens. That
Right.
happens a lot. That happens a lot more than you'd expect.
Well, I know it happens, but like it was clearly obvious that this was not the case. But that was my excuse. I didn't have quite what we have today, obviously, but back then I don't think Amazon was doing much of clothes yet. They were starting to do a little bit more than just I think they had just gotten into like electronics and stuff. But like
Yeah.
I remember my first like foray into the internet really was dial up and I was maybe 7 or 8. We had dial up. And DSL was already a thing, but like we
Yeah.
only had dial up because I lived in the country in the middle of nowhere. But I remember I'd go with my dad to work and he had a high-speed internet computer at his work because he did audio engineering, so he had really good connections and stuff. And I used to just like daydream on eBay because eBay was new at the time, and I used to just scroll eBay like, oh, look at all these deals that as a as like a 10-year-old, I had no money for, but I was just like,
Yeah.
if only I had money, I could bid on these things that are 99 cents right now, the starting bid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's just so funny to think back to some of that time, and then I would leave and go back home and like not have access to that for weeks. So it's like, you know, perks of being
Yeah.
homeschooled
No,
though. You can go with your dad to work.
yeah. So, oh, so like as I've like gotten out in the world, and especially as I've gotten to know a lot more Americans, um, I learn of a lot more people being homeschooled, which just is barely a thing here. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen here, but it's certainly not part. There's no. I don't get the sense that there's really any culture of homeschooling, and I
Mm,
recognize that there's cultural differences in Canadians and Americans, and a lot of it is like trust in government to some extent. Beyond, obviously, so most kids go to public schools. Obviously, people who can afford it often will take private schools or religious schools, but we don't, or at least I don't get the sense, unless I'm completely out of the loop and sort of some part of the culture is completely washing over me, get the sense that there's a big homeschool culture in Canada. But when I talk to Americans, time and time again, I come across people like you who are, um, who've been homeschooled. And so I'm kind of wondering, how much of a thing in terms of like, how much, like, do you think like growing up as people like us do, is homeschooling like a neutral? Is it like, does it have its perks? Does it have its drawbacks? Um, or is it something that you didn't even appreciate at the time? Like, oh, I'd rather still be in high school because of this and that, or this is great because I get to do this or that.
a little bit of all. My parents, from what they told me, homeschooled me not only because of the religious aspect, being Christian, not Catholic, but Protestant, and more closer to the evangelical side. So, like, a little bit of Pentecostal and some Baptist and type wings of it, or even non-denominational Protestant Christian. And so it was a mix of that and a mix of where we lived at the time was kind of the middle of nowhere in Virginia. It's a city called Suffolk. Um, of course, named after the English town, I'm sure. But in Suffolk, it was not known for having really good public schools. So it was like in two part. My mom, there's four children, so like you either send them all off to public school and you go work, or you stay home with the kids. That's kind of like the decision there. And she really wanted to be home with us and raise us and give us a good education. And they just thought that they could do that better. They could also instill the religious values that they wanted, but then also just give a quality education where the local public schools just didn't have it. Um, and I I look back now and I really appreciate it. I did go to public school for 2 years. We moved to East Tennessee, and I tried to go to public school there because I lost all my friend groups that I had in Virginia at the time. And so I went for 2 years, and while I liked some aspects of it, I really didn't enjoy it overall, and I ended up leaving and going back to homeschool to finish out high school. But I went for ninth and 10th grade to public school. And looking back, I missed some key things, obviously, because if it's just your parent coming up with the curriculum, you're going to get what they think is best. You're not going to get what any kind of other standard might be. But I also got things that kids never got. I got the ability to knock out all my schoolwork in like 2 hours and then go play my guitar for hours or go outside and just run around and be a kid. Um, or go shoot guns in the backyard, or go drive an old Volkswagen Rabbit around the yard that we had, like, because we had 9 acres, so we would just goof
Yeah,
off. Um, so looking back, like, I really value that education, and I was able to graduate early as an example. But each homeschool family is so different. Like, I had homeschool family friends that they were using it much more sheltering and restrictive. So like they would come over to our house and be like, "Oh, you can watch TV? You can play video games?" I'm like, "Yeah, like of course we can." Like, "Well, we're not allowed to." And I remember one family, they weren't allowed to watch the Care Bears because there was magic in it. Like, and to me as a homeschooler, I was like, "What? That is so weird."
yeah.
So like the
So
running joke is like weird homeschool kids, and it's like, yeah, but there's also like layers. There's the parents that choose to homeschool because the kid is disrupting public school and they get kicked out, and then they don't really take an interest in the education. And there's people like my parents that did it purely because they wanted to give me a better education than they thought the local school could. And then there's a mix of like religious sheltering that happens where it's more like indoctrination and control, which I saw a lot of, like very very strict parents and other homeschool families that like I said, the kids were well regulated and couldn't do certain things that I had the freedom to explore. And then socialization. So like when you're homeschooled, if you don't join homeschool groups or co-ops where you interact, you don't get any exposure to other children. You only have exposure to adults. And so
Yeah.
my favorite tagline was like, my parents raised me to be an adult, not to be a teenager. So I didn't know a lot of the things that teenagers were doing, except for getting access to dial up and things like that, and like having message boards and AOL Instant Messenger with some of my other homeschool friends. But beyond that, like it was just a different way of growing up, and I really appreciate it. I learned a lot of skills that were valuable. Not so much academic. It's not like I was going to be an AP honor grad or anything because I was able to pursue music and working on cars and things that were really interesting while also getting core science and math and stuff. The only drawback to that is I didn't get any exposure to evolution
Yeah.
theory until I went to public school, and I was like, "What is all this?" I've only heard that Genesis 1, God created the world and all of that stuff, and so there was some catching up when I joined the military at 19. There was some catching up of culture of people and how they were brought up was so different than me that it was a little bit shocking to kind of adjust to that.
Yeah, no, I imagine, like, obviously, part of the challenge with the homeschool, at least from my perspective as progressive, is that, like there's always a struggle between parental control and, parental rights, which obviously I appreciate. But, are you raising your kids to fit into broader society? And I guess in some cases you're like, well, broader society kind of sucks. I'd rather keep them here. Um, Whereas, like, and I don't, and once again, this might be sort of a Canadian American difference, is that like Canadians have traditionally put a lot of faith and a lot of value in sort of this vision of Canadianism, which involves sort of a lot of pluralistic thinking, a lot of common good, a lot of multiculturalism, and tolerance, which so these values are sort of taught through the public school system. Um,
Mm,
and there's sort of this broad acceptance, even among the kind of people would normally you would think would send their kids to a private school to be kind of like, the public school is good. And I guess obviously there's more investment in public schools here. The quality of education is good. Like, just full disclosure, my kids go to public school. Like, we can afford to send them to private school, obviously, but we send them to public school because for better or worse, we trust the system.
right.
Um, and Obviously, I think with a lot of the fracturing that's going on now in society, in terms of, we're seeing a little bit of this here too, where people are like, I don't trust the government. I want to do my own thing, but it's still mostly taken the form of sending their kids to private school. So, like, for me,
Right.
I went to private school and I went to private Jewish school, and at that time, it wasn't so much that my parents wanted the religious indoctrination because we were not a religious family, but there was a lot of fear of anti-Semitism,
Mm,
and the fear that if we went to public schools, we'd basically be getting, like, you know, uh, we'd be dealing with anti-Semitism, both in terms of slurs, but also in terms of violence. And our parents did not want us exposed to, getting beaten up by bigots every day.
right.
Now,
Yeah.
was that an overestimation of the true sense of the risk? Probably, because I know some Jewish kids went to public school and they got called names, but they generally weren't getting pounded out every day. But
Right.
still, in a tight community, there's this need to protect. And so I went to Jewish school, which was kind of it was run as a religious school, even though most of the students there were not explicitly religious. But um, once again, there are benefits and drawbacks to that. So because it was a very tight Jewish community, there were a lot of Jewish values, including sort of the values of, like, hard work and, like, and responsibility and striving,
Mm-hmm.
that were sort of really built into anyone at that school. You had a lot, like, if you wanted to succeed, there were a lot of people you had to keep up with, and so
Mm,
I don't know if those values would have been sort of stressed as much. And it didn't always come from the school, but it often just came from pressure from all the students around you who are also getting that same pressure. And obviously from parental pressure of, you got to be a doctor, you've got to be a lawyer, you got to be an accountant, you got to be a
mm,
something. And if you're not, you're kind of a nothing. Um,
right.
and uh, and we sort of took the Jewish studies, like, because I did Bible study 2 hours a day. I studied Talmud and yeah, and had a fairly good knowledge of Jewish law. And that was just sort of like, even though you're not going to do that, this just shows that you are, if you're going to succeed at everything you do. I don't care if you use this again. You've got to put your nose down and learn this stuff, because it's out of, like, a respect for the teachers and respect for the system. That you have to do that. And as I grew up, I sort of pulled a lot. back from religion, more because I found a lot of those kind of things very restrictive, especially for someone like myself who is gender variant, where sort of and a lot of these schools, conformity was very important.
Sure.
Not making waves was very important. Like not embarrassing your parents was very important.
Yeah, the
And
family, right? Like the family reputation.
well, the family reputation and standing in the community, and this was of course the 80s and 90s when even things like just gay tolerance was sort
Mm,
of still building. Like our school was not, because of its religious, Jews tend to be more progressive on average, but still it was a religious school, so it was definitely the more conservative end of the Jewish community that was running the school. We did have, like in my class, there was one out gay student who wanted to take a date, like a male date to prom, and was explicitly banned from that. This was 1989, so it wouldn't have been surprising. The rules were still, at public schools in 1989. These rules were evolving as well, but our community was sort of very conservative at that time, and I remember as I
sure.
was sort of finding myself feeling like this wasn't really a good fit for me, both the religious aspects, but also the I need people not to be watching me all the time
Right.
aspects, or trying to meet a certain standard aspects that I found very oppressive and needed some freedom from. So I dropped a lot of I dropped a lot of both the religious aspects and the community aspects around that time because I found I needed to be free from that.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we've
I
gone
mean,
deep here.
we do a lot of private school in the US for sure, but it's a money thing. And our public schools, and maybe they weren't like this in the 90s when you were going to public school in Canada, but definitely today, it's um it's it's like controlled chaos. Like there's very little learning happening, and this was true even before COVID, but definitely after COVID. It's where can we put kids for 8 hours a day and maybe teach them something, but at least they get fed and they don't get into trouble. Like that's really what public school has become. And I would say there was definitely some learning happening when I did the 2 years of public school, even in East Tennessee where I did it. Like
Yeah.
there was some aspects of what goes on today, but like the things that my stepdaughter tell me that go on in her school, like between that and the phones, like smartphones in school, which we didn't have, I can't imagine there's a whole lot of learning or effectiveness. So I could see today like being more today, if I had a child today, I would be more likely to homeschool or private school them than even before, just because I can see the shift in public school and how much they're struggling. And no fault to the teachers or anybody, like I know some amazing teachers, but they can only do so much with what,
Yeah.
the cards that they're dealt.
The system in the US is really not incentivized, at least the public school system. There's
Right,
and I recognize depending on sort of where your political valence is, how much blame you put at the feet of teachers unions versus how much you put at the foot of
right,
government funding, and obviously a lot of variation in funding. So, like I recognize an inner city public school or a rural public school in an impoverished area tends to get a
right.
lot less support than a public school in a affluent suburb. Might
Well,
get
especially
where
when the affluent people send their kids to private school or they move out of those districts for better public schools. Now that district
yes,
gets less tax money because you
yeah.
have less people who are making more money to pay more taxes.
Yeah. Whereas like in Toronto, it's one system. So,
Okay.
no matter where you live, your tax dollars, you can of course choose not to send your kids to public school,
Hmm.
but your tax dollars still go to public schools, and those monies get distributed, as needed throughout the city. So my tax dollars will go to support inner city schools, and it doesn't matter whether I go to a school in the suburbs or whether my kids go to a school downtown. There, and I don't want to make it seem like there aren't differences because there are, because there's still socioeconomic differences
Sure.
and behavioral differences in terms of the kids and parent and the parents are in a neighborhood that's more affluent, have more resources to motivate and supplement their kids' education even at public school. But yeah, but it's a little bit better here to the point that, like I said, I feel comfortable
Hmm.
sending my kids to a public school and just make sure that we're talking to them a lot at home to supplement what they're not getting. And, for us, like I said, part of this because of my leftiness is I just like the idea of my kids being exposed to different cultures, different socioeconomic classes, different,
Of
people from
course.
different backgrounds, different people with different kinds of struggles, and recognizing that their world is not necessarily going to be the cloister that it might be at some private school where everyone's got money and everyone's got, first world problems. So that was a conscious choice. Like even though, like I said, like we were doing okay financially, if we wanted to or if we needed to, they'd be in a private school tomorrow. But we just haven't felt for whatever reason that's necessary or whatever benefits they get from being there are worth it.
That's great.
All right. So,
What's
um,
next?
what's
We
next?
solved we
Uh,
solved public
we
schools.
solved all the pools. Okay, so everyone tune in for we should
Yeah.
figure it out.